non potreste essere anche tutte e due, quindi coerentemente sono ipotesi. E faccio quello che Samsung. Hello, hello, hello.
Namaskar, good morning. A warm welcome to all of you. National webinar on the auspicious of Azadi Ka Amrit Mahotsav on the contribution of Bhagwan Birsa Munda for the struggle of India's independence. This national webinar is conceived of on the auspicious occasion of Bhagwan Birsa Munda's Jayanti, which is celebrated as Janajatiya Gaurav Divas in the country. Organized by SC/ST RTI, TRI Odisha, ST and SC Development Department with support from Ministry of Tribal Affairs, Government of India. Among the illustrious sons of India having immense contribution to the freedom struggle, the tribal leader Bhagwan Birsa Munda stands grand. As a rebel and a visionary, he was instrumental in liberating the tribal community from the persistent dominance by the British exploitative policies and atrocities. Having spearheaded the tribal religious millenarian movement, Bhagwan Birsa Munda carved a niche for himself in the domain of Indian independence movement. On his auspicious Jayanti, we pay our deepest homage to the great soul. To make this occasion a memorable one, we have got two sessions, the ongoing inaugural session and the technical session to follow. We are very much privileged to have in the inaugural session Honorable Minister, ST and SC Development Department, Government of Odisha, Sri Jagannath Sarakaji. We have renowned educationist and professor of eminence, Professor Vijay S. Sahayaji, esteemed Joint Secretary, Ministry of Tribal Affairs, Government of India, Dr. Navaljeet Kapoor, who is joining us very shortly, and esteemed Principal Secretary, ST and SC Development Department, Government of Odisha, Madam Ranjana Chopraji, esteemed Director, SC/ST RTI, TRI Odisha, Professor Akhil Bihari Otaji, Joint Director, SC/ST RTI, TRI Odisha, Ms. Kalpana Patnaikji, and also we have some of the panel members, panelists, those who will be adoring in this session, in the technical session to follow. And to start with, I would like to request Reverend Advisor, Director and Special Secretary, SC/ST RTI, TRI Odisha, and an eminent academician and administrator of our time of the state, Professor Akhil Bihari Ota, to present the welcome address.
Thank you. Today is the birth anniversary of Bhagwan Birsa Munda, and this day is also celebrated as Janajatiya Divas throughout the country. And this week, starting from 15th to 27th, iconic week to mark the anniversary of the great tribal freedom fighter who has sacrificed his life for the country's independence. This is a part of the celebration under Azadi Ka Amrit Mahotsav. At the outset, I, on behalf of the organizers and on behalf of all those who are associated with this national webinar, pay tribute and homage to the great tribal hero, Bhagwan Birsa Munda, who has gallantly fought against the foreign rulers and has become a torchbearer for tribal people of the country to take the struggle forward. The national webinar titled Contributions of Bhagwan Birsa Munda for the Struggle of India's Independence is in fact organized as a part of the iconic week celebrations. I take this opportunity to extend a very warm welcome to Sri Jagannath Sarakaji, Honorable Minister, ST and SC Development Department, Government of Odisha, for gracing the inaugural session of the national webinar, which is organized as a part of the week-long celebration, as I have said. And this is the Janajatiya Gaurav Divas in honor of Bhagwan Birsa Munda. We are really grateful to you, sir, for kindly attending this from the tribal area, despite your busy
हेलो चल तो रहा
अब नहीं आ रही है। तो चलो
नहीं मेरे
डॉक्यूमेंट्स
the inaugural session and would chair the technical session to follow. We extend our gratitude to you, sir, and a hearty welcome. We have four studded panelists with us today who will debate on the different contributions of the great freedom fighter, Bhagwan Birsa Munda. Professor K.K. Basa is of Maharaja Sri Ramchandra Bhanjadev University, Mayurbhanj, Odisha. Professor Satyanarayan Munda, former VC, Dr. Syama Prasad Mukherjee University, Ranchi. Professor Sumohan Bandyopadhyay of Department of Anthropology and Director, Adivasi Studies, Vidyasagar University. And Mr. Gunjal Ikir Munda, a noted social development expert who has always been fighting for the cause of tribal communities. He is from Ranchi, Jharkhand. I extend a very warm welcome to you all, sirs. I also take this opportunity to extend a very warm welcome to all the director TRIs, head Center of Excellences, and the colleagues, many academicians, researchers, civil society organization representatives, and tribal youths who are attending the webinar today. As I've already said, 15th November has been declared as Janajatiya Gaurav Divas by Government of India, and this week is celebrated in various parts of the country as iconic week in remembrance of great freedom fighter Bhagwan Birsa Munda. To mark the occasion, SC/ST RTI under ST and SC Development Department, Government of Odisha, in collaboration with the Ministry of Tribal Affairs, is organizing this national webinar to discuss and deliberate extensively on the life and contributions of this great son of the country whose inspiration drove to achieve our independence. I again extend a warm welcome to one and all for your benign presence and hope that the national webinar with star-studded panelists will throw more light on the life and contributions of Bhagwan Birsa Munda that can go to the public domain and will generate pride in the heart and soul of the tribal fraternity, who will get inspired to continue significantly for the nation building. Thank you.
We are extremely thankful to Professor Akhil Bihari Hota for the welcome address. Now I deem it a privilege to request esteemed Principal Secretary, ST and SC Development Department, Government of Odisha, Madam Rajana Chuklaji, to address the webinar.
Honorable Minister, ST and SC Development Department, Government of Orissa, Joint Secretary, Ministry of Tribal Affairs, Director, SC/ST RTI, Government of Orissa, Directors of TRIs who are connected with us virtually, Professor Vijay Sahai, eminent academicians and thinkers who have joined us today, and ladies and gentlemen. First of all, I would like to congratulate Dr. Ota and his team in SC/ST RTI for having put together this webinar. I was just looking at the list of panelists who would be chairing the technical session in the later half of the day today, and I find the name academic thinkers of our time, philosophers, anthropological doyens of our time, Professor Vijay Sahai, Professor K.K. Basa, Professor Sumahan Bandyopadhyay, Mr. Gunjar Ikir Munda, and Professor Satyanarayan Munda. First of all, on behalf of ST and SC Development Department, Government of Orissa, I would like to thank all the panelists for having joined us today and having agreed to participate in this national webinar. As has already been mentioned by Dr. Ota, all of you are aware that while the nation is celebrating 75 years of its glorious independence and its history, it is very, very important, and we are grateful that the government has decided to also focus on the role played by the tribal freedom fighters. All of us who are directly or indirectly working in the field of tribal welfare and tribal development would understand when I say that the tribal communities, the indigenous communities, not globally, are the communities which are the actual torch bearers and the custodians of this earth. They have the most intimate relations with their environment. Now, when so much is being talked about climate change, especially in the context of the Glasgow summit, one is finding that the focus is coming back to the traditional practices followed by these indigenous community. And rightfully, the focus of this independence celebration today, it is also being made on the tribal communities of our country, who have played a very, very important role in the freedom struggle of our country. Now, in case we look into the history, we find that Bhagwan Birsa Munda, who is revered, who has been deified and has been given a godlike stature by his community, actually was one of the few leaders who was able to thwart the expansion of British colonialism and was able to safeguard the uniqueness and identity of the community's rule over the Chota Nagpur plateau. Similar to Bhagwan Birsa Munda, I would also like to recall and pay homage to the tribal freedom fighters of Orissa, like Shri Lakshman Nayak of Koraput, Shri Ratan Nayak of Kyonjar, Dora Bisoi and Chakra Bisoi of Gumsur. These are the freedom fighters in whom we rightfully take a lot of pride. The tribal communities in our state are very, very famous for their cultural practices, for their anthropological uniqueness, for their sense of identity, and for the sense of dignity with which they are carrying themselves. So in our state, we are doing our best to make sure that the tribal communities are mainstreamed and that we can work towards their socio-economic development and that they rise up on the indices as far as Human Development Index is concerned. Towards that, the government of Orissa has launched a number of programs. These programs are pertaining to livelihood, education, and legal entitlement verticals. So today, I think it will be befitting that we will like to dedicate the efforts that we are making towards the empowerment and towards the advancement of tribal communities. I would like to dedicate all the efforts made by us to the glorified tribal freedom fighters of our country. And as Dr. Ota has already mentioned, we are also going to have a week-long celebration in our state. Various events will be held. It is being kickstarted today. And finally, towards the end, before I conclude, I would once again like to convey my best wishes to all of you and would once again like to remember the contributions and the sacrifices made by Bhagwan Birsa Munda, and also acknowledge and recognize that today, 15th of November, which will henceforth be dedicated and celebrated as the Janjatiya Gaurav Divas, will actually be a milestone, and all the people, all of us who are working in the sector of tribal development will always consider this to be a landmark occasion in the history of tribal advancement in our country. Thank you very much.
Extremely grateful to Madam Vandana Chakraji for such an enlightening address. Now I take the opportunity to request Dr. Navaljit Kapoor, esteemed Joint Secretary, Ministry of Tribal Affairs, Government of India, to throw light on the national webinar under the auspices of Azadi Ka Amrit Mahotsav.
Honorable Minister, Government of Orissa, Shri Jagannath Sarakaji, Ms. Ranjana Chopra, Principal Secretary, Government of Odisha, Dr. Ota, Director TRI, eminent speakers and panelists from all over the country. All of you are aware that on the eve of 75 years of independence, Azadi Ka Amrit Mahotsav, Union Cabinet, chaired by Honorable Prime Minister, has announced to commemorate 15th November, the birth anniversary of Bhagwan Birsa Munda, as Janjatiya Gaurav Divas. Government has also taken a decision to mark week-long celebration starting from 15th November to 22nd November, dedicated to tribal freedom fighters. In fact, from 12th March, we have already started various activities for celebrating Azadi Ka Amrit Mahotsav. We are working on literature of tribal freedom fighters. Honorable Prime Minister, in his speech on 15th August 2016, very categorically said that we only know about very few tribal freedom fighters. Birsa Munda is one such name whom some people know. I am also a student of history, but all of us know very little about tribal freedom fighters. So we have asked all the TRIs to do research on tribal freedom fighters. And happy to tell you that we have found 85 revolts from all over the country, and more than 400 tribal freedom fighters, they have been recognized. We are also working on documenting tribal dances, tribal cuisines, and have organized activities across the country. In fact, 37 activities have been planned during the year, and I congratulate that TRI Odisha, they have started these initiatives with a webinar on contribution of Birsa Munda. Honorable Prime Minister, in the morning, he dedicated to the nation the first museum which was built in the memory of these freedom fighters from Ranchi. And he also paid floral tributes on the statue of Bhagwan Birsa Munda. We have started celebrations in Bhopal for Janjatiya Gaurav Divas, and the celebrations are across the country, including TRI Odisha. In fact, I will personally thank Principal Secretary and Otaji, TRI Odisha Director, for guiding us not only on the research in respect of tribal freedom fighters, but in fact, he has taken a lot of initiative in coordinating with other TRIs also. I once again congratulate entire TRI team of Odisha for this webinar, and I'm sure that after this webinar, I'm told there is only one book research thesis on Bhagwan Birsa Munda, but based on the inputs from various eminent speakers, we will certainly come out with some documentation on Bhagwan Birsa Munda. Thank you once again for inviting me for this program. Thank you.
We are thankful to Dr. Kapoor for setting the context. Now it's time to listen to the keynote address to be delivered by Professor Vijay S. Sahai, former Professor of Anthropology, University of Allahabad, on the making of Bhagwan Birsa Munda cult, the journey of a tribal hero from agrarian movement to war independence. It goes without saying that Professor Vijay S. Sahai is a renowned anthropologist of our time, author of a number of books and so many research papers. Professor Sahai is the editor-in-chief of the internationally renowned research journal, The Oriental Anthropologist. May I request you, sir, to kindly present the keynote address.
Hello. Am I audible to everybody?
Yes, you are.
Hello.
Professor Sahai, you are audible.
Oh, thank you. Should I start?
Please.
To begin with, I must first of all thank Professor Ota for providing me this opportunity to be with you all. And this week-long celebrations during the Azadi ke Amrit Mahotsav and Janjatiya Gaurav Divas. I am born and brought up in Jharkhand. I pay my hearty tribute to Birsa Bhagwan, who within a short span of life of barely 25 years, this legendary tribal hero, Birsa Munda, transformed into Birsa Bhagwan. Born on Thursday, 15th of November, 1875. His father was Saguna Munda and mother Karmi Hatu in the Ulu Hatu village of the then Lohardaga district under the presidency of Bengal. Now it is, of course, Khunti district of the state of Jharkhand. He was born at the zenith of the period of the mighty British Empire. This transformation of an ordinary child from Birsa Munda to Birsa David, then to Birsa Daud, and then to Birsa Bhagwan, and finally Dharti Aba, speaks volumes of the roller coasters that Birsa Bhagwan might have undergone during his formative years. Birsa Bhagwan's emergence as a Messiah has to be understood in the backdrop of the already smoldering fire in the form of tribal uprisings in the region in particular and country in general that had been taking place and that continued unabated. The Tamar revolt of 1784, the Paharia movement of the second half of the 18th century, the coal movement of the early 18th century, the Santhal rebellion of 1885, the Bhuya and the Juang risings in the 19th century in Kyonjhar, Mayurbhanj, Gangpur, Bamda, Kalahandi, and Dhenkalan districts of then Orissa, now of course Odisha, are but only few examples of the discontent of the tribesmen and their uprisings during the all-powerful British Raj. Not only in the Bengal presidency, but in other parts of the country as well. For example, in Andhra Pradesh, a number of tribal revolts took place between the years 1803, 1862, 1879, and 1880. In this connection, Zelyong's strong movement of the Nagas of the Northeast could also be referred to. Bhagwan Birsa Munda's movement of 1895 was yet another powerful sequel to the aforesaid earlier episodes. Well, without going into the details of the tribal uprisings referred to above and their consequences, I would only like to draw your attention to the fact that before the arrival of the Britishers and their entry into the tribal heartlands of India, there is no historical record as such of any tribal revolt in any part of the country. If any one of you know, I would be enlightened to understand from them. Well, either during the... Hello?
Please go ahead, sir.
Okay. So I just want to draw your attention that before the advent of the Britishers and their consolidation of power and influence in India, there is hardly any account of any tribal report. Neither during the 600 years of Muslim rule or even in the ancient India. Then why at all it began only after the arrival of the British and their consolidation of power in India? This is a point to ponder and to research also. The reasons for this for this are not very far to see. It should be noted that wherever the indigenous or the tribal people lived, barring a few exceptions, of course, such as the Kalahari Desert of Africa, where the Kung tribe lives, the natural resources are found to be in abundance. In India also, in most parts of the tribal heartlands, there are luxuriant growth of tropical forest. From time immemorial, the tribesmen have considered their rights over their forests and their produce. Neither during the ancient India nor during the medieval period, any of the rulers ever interfered in their rights. But the scenario abruptly changed after the arrival of the Britishers. They needed timber for shipbuilding to improve their navigation. And once they introduced the network of railways in India, they again needed timber for the extension of the railway tracks. As a result, large-scale deforestation started in India, particularly where timbers were available. Well, we all know that the sal trees of Saranda forest of Singhbhum district of Chotanagpur, which has been the epicenter of Birsa Munda movement or Ulgulan, I can say. And the sal trees of this region is of world fame. If we examine the timeline of Birsa Bhagwan's life, we find that though he was born in the present-day Khuti district of Jharkhand, but much of his childhood were spent in Chaibasa, which was the headquarters of the adjacent district of Singhbhum. During his formative years itself, he witnessed the exploitation and the infringement over the right to forest of his people, and thereby interferences in tribal life, culture, and habitat by the Britishers. In addition to the above, what must have added fuel to the already smoldering fire in the mind of the young Birsa was the influx of outsiders in the region. Why did the outsiders came to these places? It was the British who knew that the Mundas and the Hos living in that region did not produce surplus because they were equipped with their subsistence level technology only. With the consolidation of power and influence, they needed taxes. They did not ask for taxes to the tribesmen for fear of repercussion. So they encouraged outsiders, particularly the agricultural communities from the north of the then state of Bihar, you can say, communities from the northern part of the state. Thus, the zamindari system, they invited the people to plow the land and produce surplus production so that they could obtain taxes. Thus, the zamindari system consolidated in the region, and businessmen sahukars, money lenders, thekedars, and all these people began to flock the tribal land. With the passage of the time, the outsiders, which the tribesmen called dikus, they perhaps they outnumbered the tribals. It was more than sufficient to aggravate the situation, and Birsa Bhagwan could not remain a mute spectator to witness all this taking place in his land. And the last nail in the coffin was put by the Christian missionaries. I've already written in several of my articles earlier that no sooner had the European colonizers arrived in any newly discovered land and consolidated their power, the Christian missionaries followed them and began proselytization of the natives there. This exactly happened in the tribal-dominated regions of India, including Chotanagpur and Jharkhand. We all know that in his childhood, Birsa Munda was admitted in a missionary school in Simbhum and was proselytized. After his conversion to Christianity, he was first named Birsa David and then Birsa Daud. Birsa was not an ordinary tribal lad. In spite of his conversion to Christianity first in his childhood, he was critical of the conversion. He was restless to see the usurpation of tribal land by the outsiders, exploitation by the landlords, businessmen, and moneylenders. Under such a restless condition of mind, according to some sources, he met a Vaishnavite priest and was indoctrinated by him. This made a turning point in his life. A rebel in him fulminated against the existing system, and his march towards becoming Birsa Bhagwan and Dharti Aba began. He became determined to restore and revive the traditional tribal culture of the land and people that was being spoiled by the missionaries. Thus he thought and suddenly denounced Christianity and criticized the church for its practices of levying of taxes and religious conversion. He himself became a preacher and an epitome of tribal tradition, tribal religion. Gradually, he also developed a reputation of a healer. This is how the making of Birsa Bhagwan began. People from all walks of life flocked to him, to his villages, or wherever he went, to seek his blessings and be cured of their ailments. Besides the Mundas, all the neighboring tribal groups, such as the Oraons, the Ho, the Kharia, etc., believed that Birsa had been bestowed with some spiritual powers to save them from all sorts of distresses. I remember in the late 1950s, when I had not even entered my teenage, one of my old grandmothers often said that she had seen Birsa Bhagwan when the Britishers had arrested and brought him to Ranchi. By the late 1890s, Birsa Bhagwan had become a Masiha, a savior of his land, people, and their culture. He had huge followers from all the communities inhabiting the region, tribal as well as non-tribal. His followers were called Birsites. Thus, Birsa Bhagwan founded a new religion called Birsites. Birsa Bhagwan wanted to reform the tribal society. He urged his followers, that is the Birsites, to abandon alcoholism, do not believe in witchcraft, stressed on importance of prayer, to have faith in God, and to observe certain moral codes of conduct. On the one hand, Birsa was preaching his new religion And on the other, he was attacking the church against conversion in his discourses with his followers. Birsa invoked his followers not to pay any tax to the Britishers. He proclaimed that the forests belonged to the earth and they were the sons of the soil. They and their ancestors had enjoyed full right over the land and the forests since time immemorial. Therefore, the Britishers had no right to levying of taxes. He considered that the Britishers had spoiled their traditional land system by inviting outsiders, that is the Dikus, who served as agents of the colonial rulers. Birsa himself declared that God had appointed him to save his people from the troubles and free them from the slavery of the Dikus and the Britishers. At his one call, thousands of followers assembled and were ready to do or die. He was against all the Britishers, he was against all the Britishers, the church, and the Dikus. At such a meteoric rise of Birsa Munda as a leader of and saver of his people, the Britishers got alarmed and they began to adopt all sorts of punitive measures to stop the movement. What added fuel to the fire in the mind of the colonial rulers was Birsa's slogan, Abua Raj Ete Jana, Maharani Raj Tunde Jana, meaning thereby, let the kingdom of Queen, that is Victoria was the queen in those days. So let the kingdom of Queen be ended and our kingdom be established. Henceforth, Birsa Bhagwan became Dharti Aba, father of the earth. Birsa Munda's revolt, which is known as Ulgulan, so powerfully erupted during the second half of the 19th century that the entire prevailing, when the entire prevailing socio-economic and political condition of the time. Soon after the first war of independence in 1857, which the Britishers or the British historians call Mutiny of 1857, on 2nd August 1858, the East India Company had transferred power to the British Crown. This transfer of power, after the transfer, the Britishers had completely consolidated the power influence in India. Discontent against the British in the tribal belts of the presidency of Bengal was already existing. Several uprisings during the 18th century had been suppressed by punitive measures or by devising some compromise formula in order to collect taxes through the surplus production. The outsiders in the entire tribal belts were allowed by the British to penetrate their large-scale alienation of tribal land had already taken place. The British did not rule directly, but they adopted the system of indirect rule. Due to the policy of indirect rule by the British, the local Rajas and Zamindars had become very powerful. The tribesmen who were of the egalitarian society were confused and upset to see their society being converted into a feudal society. They considered that the landlords, the sahukars and moneylenders were all British agents who were exploiting them. Therefore, Birsa's Ulgulan was not merely against the British, but against all. Birsa Munda's Ulgulan was a movement to reform the tribal societies living in the region. He went against the British, the missionaries, moneylenders, traders, and Hindu landlords, whom he considered the agents of the Britishers, employed for exploiting the tribesmen. The spread of Ulgulan worried the British. On August 24, 1895, the then district guard of Ranchi went to Birsa Munda's village and arrested him while he was sleeping. He was brought to Ranchi and imprisoned for 2 years. After his release from the jail, Birsa continues to steer his movement. Finally, according to some sources, on 3rd February 1900, he was again arrested from the forests of Chakradharpur and imprisoned in Ranchi jail. According to another source, yet another source, 460 tribals were accused of 15 different criminal cases, out of which 63 were convicted, 1 was sentenced to death, 39 were transported for life to Kalapani, and the rest were imprisoned for no less than 14 years. Birsa Munda died in Ranchi jail on June 9, 1900. Allegedly, he is said to have died of cholera. Although different dates are subscribed for Birsa Munda's birth, but the Union Cabinet at a meeting on November 10, 2021, voted for November 15 to be celebrated as the birth anniversary of Birsa Bhagwan. Well, there are a lot of aspects which should be discussed and which should be researched, such as the outcome of Ulgulan. At least only after 7 years of Birsa Munda's death, the Chota Nagpur Tenancy Act was introduced here to pacify the tribesmen. Then today, Birsa Bhagwan has become a cult. Umpteen number of institutions in the name of Birsa Munda. Umpteen number of institutions and so many agricultural university, then airport, so many. Hundreds and hundreds of statues have been erected, or have been placed in different parts of the state. And any agitation today, be it by the opposition parties or the ruling parties, that starts with garlanding of the Birsa Munda, all this shows that today Birsa Bhagwan has become a cult. Why he became a cult, these things are such things which can be debated, which can be discussed for hours together. And I also want to draw your attention that most of the rather foreign scholars, they call Ulgulan or the Birsa movement as a millenarian movement. Now, this has also to be examined and researched and written. And I thank Professor Oda for giving me this opportunity, which has given me some interest now, and I'm sure that in future I will be doing some research on this and try to explain anthropologically, from the social point of view, the causal explanation of this Birsa movement or Ulgulan and its consequences. I thank you all for giving me this opportunity to speak before you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir. Thank you.
It is a moment in life to listen to Professor Vijay Sahaji. We express our heartfelt gratitude to Professor Vijay S. Sahaji for the resourceful keynote address. Indeed, we express our heartfelt gratitude to Professor Vijay S. Sahaji for the resourceful keynote address on the making of Bhagwan Birsa Munda cult. Now we take the opportunity to request Honorable Minister, ST and SC Development Department, Government of Odisha, to address the national OEB.
नमस्कार आजादी का अमृत महोत्सव पालन परिप्रेक्षी आयोजित महान आदिवासी विप्लवी भगवान बिरसा मुंडा भारतर स्वाधीन संग्राम रे अवदान विशिष्ट आलोचना चक्र रे उपस्थित ओडिशा सरकार अन्य विभागीय पदाधिकारी उपस्थित समस्त बंधुगण को स्वागत एवं शुभेच्छा जनाऊँ। मु निजे जने आदिवासी हिसाब रे विप्लवी बिरसा मुंडा जयंती अवसर किछि कहवा सुजोग पाई मु निजे गर्वित मन करुछि। स्वाधीनता संग्राम रे जे केते जन चिरस्मरणीय स्वाधीनता संग्रामी प्राण बलि देइथिले विप्लवी बिरसा मुंडा सेमानक मध्यरु अन्यतम। 19 शताब्दीर शेष आडू भगवान भारतर पूर्वांचल राज्य मानक भितर जे विप्लव आरंभ होइतिला ताहार नेतृत्व नेतिले भगवान बिरसा मुंडा। ब्रिटिश राज विरुद्ध रे स्वरोत्तोलन परिवार प्रमुख सूत्रधर बिरसा मुंडांकर जन्म 1875 मसीहा नवेम्बर मास 15 तारिख अर्थात आज तांकर पवित्र जन्मतिथि रे मु सेही महान अमर आत्मा प्रति गभीर श्रद्धांजलि जनाऊँ। बिरसा मुंडा जने मुंडा संप्रदायर आदिवासी जननेता थिले। मात्र 20 वर्ष बयस रे से पराक्रमशाली ब्रिटिश सरकार विरुद्ध रे मुंडा संप्रदाय एवं अन्यान्य आदिवासी संप्रदाय को संगठित करथिले। ब्रिटिश सरकार प्रोत्साहन पाई तत्कालीन जागीरदार जमींदार और ठिकादार माने आदिवासी मानक उपरे अत्याचार और शोषण करथिले। एहा को विरोध करी बिरसा मुंडा निरीह सरल आदिवासी जनजाति को हृदय रे स्वाधीनता पाई विप्लव शिका उज्जीवित करथिले। 1894 मसीहा घटिथिबा दुर्भिक्ष पर खाद्य अभाव सांग को होइजा और बसंत रोग व्यापी जाइथिबारु बहु लोक मृत्यु मुखरे पड़थिले। एही बळी महामारी सदृश परिस्थिति को भय न करी से गाँ गाँ बुली लोक मानक सेवा कले। आश्चर्यर कथा से जेउ रोगी पाखक जाई सेवा कले रोगी सुस्थ हो जिबार खबर व्यापी जिबार विप्लवी बिरसा निकटरे ऐश्वर्य शक्ति अच्छी बोली विश्वास करी तांको बिरसा भगवान बोली कहथिले। साधारण लोकंकर मध्यरे धारणा हैला जे बिरसा जहा छुई देबे से माने मरण महरु मृत्यु मुखरु निश्चित बंची जिबे। तेणु बिरसा को लोक माने दर्ते आबा मध्य कहथिले एवं संबोधन मध्य करुथिले। भगवान भावे पूजा मध्य करुथिले। विप्लवी बिरसा नेतृत्व रे सांगठनिक सामर्थ्य अग्निवर्षी आह्वान हजार हजार आदिवासी मातृभूमि को ब्रिटिश शासन कबलरू मुक्त करबा पाई जे आंदोलन आरंभ करथिले सेतिर भयभीत होई तांको बंदी करथिले। हजारीबाग जेल रे तांकर देह असुस्थ हेबारु तांको रांची जेल को पठा दिया गला। मात्र 25 वर्ष बयस रे 1900 मसीहा जून 9 तारिख से शेष निश्वास त्याग करथिले। मु बहुत आनंदित जे जनजाति स्वाधीनता संग्रामी अवदान को जन समाज रे पहुंचाइबा पाई आलोचना चक्र आयोजन करा जायछि एवं एतिरे जोग देथिबारु मु निजे आदिवासी हिसाब रे धन्य मन करछि। एणु एति पाई एही आलोचना चक्र आयोजक भारत सरकार एवं ओडिशा सरकार जनजाति उन्नयन विभाग सम्मानीय पदाधिकारी एवं मुख्य वक्ता महोदय को मु अशेष अशेष धन्यवाद दूछि एवं नमस्कार करछि। वंदे उत्कल जयंती।
मंत्री महोदय को हमें कृतज्ञता अर्पण करूछु भगवदीय उपस्थिति पाई एवं संबोधन पाई। थैंक यू सर। थैंक्स फॉर योर इंस्पायरिंग एड्रेस on this occasion. Before we conclude the inaugural session and take a lead to the technical session, we would like to request Ms. Kalpana Patnaik, Joint Director, SCST RTI Odisha, to present the vote of thanks.
Namaskar. On behalf of SCST RTI, it's my privilege to propose vote of thanks to all guests. This is inaugural session of the national webinar. At the outset, I would like to offer my sincere homage and gratefulness to the Bhagwan Birsa Munda on his 146th anniversary today, and acknowledge his great contribution during the struggle for independence on the occasion of Azadi Ka Amrit Mahotsav celebration of Government of India. I would like to extend my heartfelt gratitude and thanks to Honorable Minister, SC and LC Development, Government of Odisha, Sri Jagannath Bharat, for his kind presence and valuable inaugural address. Professor, Department of Anthropology, University of Allahabad, for his third provocative keynote address. I express my heartfelt gratitude to Dr. Navalji Prabhu, Joint Secretary, Ministry of Tribal Affairs, Government of India, for his motivational address, kind content and support. My sincere gratitude and thanks goes to Madam Banjana Chopra, Principal Secretary, SP and SC Development Department, Government of Odisha, for having graced the occasion and for their consistent guidance, encouragement, and support. My sincere thanks and gratitude to Professor Dr. A.V. Utta, Advisor from Director and Special Secretary, SPRTI, for his painstaking efforts, consistent guidance, and supervision in making the national webinar a reality. I am grateful to all the senior officers of Ministry of Tribal Affairs, TRI directors, directors of COEs, officers of Government of Odisha, resource persons, and scholars for their participation and kind presence in the webinar. I extend my sincere thanks to one and all who have worked persistently to organize the national webinar and making this inaugural session a success. Thank you.
So after this inaugural session, we would now directly move to the technical session. And we are very much delighted to have eminent panelists, those who will be deliberating on the life and legacy and the achievements and contributions of Birsa Mundaji, Bhagwan Birsa Mundaji. Once again, our cordial welcome to you in the technical session of the national webinar on contributions of Bhagwan Birsa Munda for struggle of India's independence. As the adage goes, the sacrifice of a warrior for the cause of the nation never goes in vain. This apothegm finds a true paradigm in the dedicated life of Bhagwan Birsa Munda. His life was short-lived, but was eventful, which witnessed heroism, valor, courage, and far-fetched vision to emerge as a hero in the War of Independence. I am reminded about an often quoted couplet of Ben Jonson. In small proportion we just beauties see, in short measures life may perfect be. Indeed, living for 100 years like that of an oak tree is not as important as living for a few days like that of a fragrant flower, the rose. In the same way, Bhagwan Birsa Munda led his short-span life, which is so inspiring to the generations to come. In the technical session, the erudite panelists will deliberate on the dedicated life, philosophy, and ideals of the great hero, Bhagwan Birsa Munda. We welcome all the esteemed panelists of this session. So, before we move on to the technical session, I would like to request Professor Vijay S. Sahaji for the Professor, Department of Anthropology, Allahabad, who will be chairing this technical session. And we are very much delighted to have in this panel Professor Kishore Kumar Vasa, esteemed Vice Chancellor, Maharaja Sri Ramchandra Kanjadev Haripada, Professor Suman Bandyopadhyay, Department of Anthropology and Director Center for Adivasi Studies, Vidyasagar University. We are very much delighted to have in our midst Mr. Vijay Munda, fellow tribal and regional languages social development consultant from Jharkhand, and Professor Satya Narayan Munda, former Vice Chancellor, Dr. Shama Prasad Mukherjee University, Ranchi, and also esteemed Director SCST RTI TRI Odisha, Professor Dr. A.B. Utta. So I take the privilege to request Professor Vijay Sahaji to kindly chair this technical session. And before that, I would like to present a short profile of Professor Vijay Sahaji. Professor Vijay Sahaji, former Head Department of Anthropology, University of Allahabad, did his graduation with honors and masters in anthropology with first position in first class from Ranchi University. He obtained PhD for his fascinating research work on the Nicobar Archipelago under the supervision of Professor L.P. Didyapthi. Professor Saha's main areas of interest in anthropology have been teaching anthropological theories and conducting field researches
among the most primitive tribal groups of the country, particularly the primitive tribes of Andaman and Nicobar Islands. Author of a number of books and over 50 research papers, to his credit, Professor Sahai is the editor-in-chief of the internationally renowned research journal, Oriental Anthropologist, published by the Sales Publications. His latest book, Experiencing Anthropology in the Nicobar Archipelago, has been brought out by the Routledge in 2021. Professor Sahai's forthcoming book is on anthropological thought, from evolutionism to postmodernism. Besides visiting and delivering a number of lectures in different universities in India and abroad, Professor Sahai was a visiting fellow to the KwaZulu-Natal University, Durban, South Africa, Arhus University, Denmark, Rajiv Gandhi Central University, Arunachal Pradesh, Vidyasagar University, Midnapur, and Namraz University, Madurai. Professor Sahai has also been member of two important committees constituted by Government of India for the protection and preservation of the dwindling tribes of Andaman and Nicobar Islands. I would like to request, I take this opportunity to request Professor Vijay Sahai to kindly share this technical session.
Over to you.
Thank you very much. In fact, chairing a session where so good scholars are the panelists, I find it a little bit difficult, of course. However, we have a lot of time, and I think every speaker can speak for even more than 20 minutes. We would not have any problem to listen to him. And I hope that after all the panelists have presented their views, we can have some discussion also on it. Because as I told you at the fag end of my presentation, that there are a lot of things which have to be researched further and brought to light. And I once again thank Professor Ota for giving me this opportunity and generating interest in me to look into the tribal revolts in general, and particularly Birsa Munda's revolt and all. Let's see in future we can do some researches and bring it to light to the public. With these words, may I invite Professor K.K. Basa to put his views. Professor K.K. Basa, please.
We are extremely thankful to Professor Vijay Sahai for chairing this session. And now, before we move on to listen to the eminent panelist of this national event, Professor Kishore Kumar Basa, I have the privilege to present a short profile of Professor Basa. Professor Kishore Kumar Basa is the Vice Chancellor of Maharaja Sri Ramchandra Bhanjadeva University, Balpada, Odisha. Professor Basa had his double post-graduation in history and anthropology from Delhi and from Utkal University, respectively. Professor Basa, a topper in 1973 matriculation examination, had his doctorate degree from London University and had his postdoctoral degree from Cambridge University. His distinguished career started as a faculty in the Department of Anthropology, Utkal University, Bhubaneswar, and he taught there from 1980 to 2018. He also availed the Indo-French Cultural Exchange Program and also won the Swan Hellenic Grant for visiting archaeological sites in the Mediterranean. He has supervised 10 PhD students, authored 11 books, and published 68 research articles. His publications are in the fields of archaeology, anthropology, and museum studies. Professor Basa has worked as the director, Indira Gandhi Rashtriya Manav Sangrahalaya, Bhopal, India Museum, Kolkata, and also the Anthropological Survey. He has also been a Commonwealth postdoctoral fellow at the University of Cambridge and the Tribal National Fellow, Ministry of Culture, Government of India. Mr. Basa has been a member of several important academic and government bodies to anthropology, specifically to archaeological anthropology and museum studies in particular. I take the opportunity to request Professor Kishore Kumar Basa to present a talk on a discourse on Birsa Munda, life and leaders. Now, over to Professor Kishore Kumar Basa.
Respected Professor Sahai, the chairman of the session, respected Professor Ota, Director SCST RTI, Bhubaneswar, my fellow panelists, ladies and gentlemen, it is indeed a great privilege for me to be invited to this panel organized by SCST RTI, Bhubaneswar, in collaboration with Ministry of Tribal Affairs, Government of India. On this auspicious occasion, let me pay homage to one of the most dearest sons of India, Bhagwan Sri Birsa Munda ji, on his birthday. And what a wonderful step taken by the Government of India to commemorate his birthday in the form of Janjatiya Gaurav Divas. I think this shows an important example of the legacy, rich legacy that Bhagwan Birsa Munda has left for us. After the brilliant keynote address of Professor Sahai, I find it difficult to speak anything extra. However, before coming to the basic topic, I would think I have to make some introductory remarks with some theoretical perspective in order to have proper perspective on in understanding the great revolutionary Bhagwan Birsa Munda. I don't know who has said this, but this quotation is most appropriate at the moment. No one can stop an idea whose time has come. I think this is the time to recognize the contribution made by our tribal brothers and sisters in general and Bhagwan Birsa Munda in particular for the cause of tribals as well as their contribution in the freedom struggle. This is the first point that I would like to make. The second point is what is known as the emergence of post-colonial theory in social sciences. All of us know that the colonial writings by British administrators and scholars have put some pejorative and stereotype typical images of the tribals. For them, the tribals were barbarian, they were uncivilized, and they were exotics. And therefore, if you see the colonial writings, you will find that there is an element of exoticism in their writings. For example, the title, for example, the Naked Nagas, for example. I mean, this is just to make a point. But then, with the emergence of post-colonial theory in social sciences, two things happen. First is that the post-colonial theorists or the workers who were working within the perspective of post-colonial theory, first they try to contextualize the writing of such sort of pejorative and stereotypical images of the tribals. For example, the basic point that was made in post-colonial theory is that, the target audience for writing such books were not Indians, nor the tribals. The target audience were the white Westerners, imperialists. And therefore, there was an element of exoticization of such tribal situations that are sort of the pejorative image of the tribes. The second is that in the post-colonial theory, there is a challenge in terms of the traditional image or the stereotypical image of the tribals. And in the process, what has happened? In the process, what has happened is what we know as autoethnography. Now, autoethnography has emerged as an important area of research, and especially in Northeast India, to challenge this stereotypical image of the tribes. So one has to try to understand, one is to try to situate Birsa Munda with such perspectives. The third point I would like to make is what is known as subaltern history, or history from below. The subaltern historians challenged the dominant historiography, and they argued that the unsung heroes or the tribals were not very much heard. And sometimes the subalterns argued that there was that their approach to freedom struggle was autonomous. There's an autonomy vis-a-vis the dominant paradigms of the freedom struggle. Therefore, one has to situate Birsa Munda from this perspective of history from below. The last point has already been highlighted by Professor Sahaya. I'm not going to expand on that. That the tribal movements are a continuum. I mean, one is to situate Birsa Munda not as an isolated entity, or nor the movement that he was parroting as a unique thing which happened suddenly. There was a historic tradition right from 18th century, as was suggested by Professor Sahai in his talk, and therefore I'm not going to say anything except that Kumar Suresh Singh has suggested that there are fourfold classification of tribal movements based on political autonomy. The example is Jharkhand movement, agrarian, which is in the form of Santal movement, Sanskritization in the form of Bhagat movement, and cultural movement for script and language by the Wheels. Now, with this general perspective, let us try to understand the contributions of Birsa Munda ji. All of us know that he spearheaded a tribal religious millennium movement, which Professor Sahai has already pointed out. Important figure in Indian freedom movement, and his activities mainly concentrated in the belt of Khunti, Tomar, Sarwada, and Banga. It is important to bear it. Portraits is perhaps the only portrait of a tribal leader which has been kept in the Parliament Museum. He was we are told that he belonged to a family of laborer or sharecropper, comes from a very modest family. He was a master flute player. It is said that he went to school at Salga. His family was converted to Christianity, and as Professor Swai said, that I think he was known as Birsa David. And also he studied in German mission school. So he had, despite the fact that he was coming from a very modest family. So he had perhaps the different opening, he has access to different aspects of the social conditions in contemporary the Chotnagpur area. Now the point is, as Professor Sahai has already suggested, the system, the system, he was gradually being getting into what we call the Sardar agitation. I mean, the major problem was that I think that was very brilliantly brought out by Professor Sahai, was that until the emergence of the British rule, the tribals were living in harmony with the forest. There was no interference in their way of life. But with the emergence of British colonial power came also the question of intensification of agriculture. Also, the money lenders also came in, commercialization of timber. Now, all this created an imbalance. Until now, the tribal people, nobody was interfering in their way of life or in their economy. Now, or whatever the kind of interference was in conformity, there was absolute balance. So they didn't feel their existence threatened. But with the emergence of intensification of agriculture, with the Dikus, the outsiders coming into their area, they felt threatened, and this ultimately led to the kind of unrest which happened, as Professor Swai has suggested, the coal rebellions, the 1850s rebellion, Sidho Kanu movements, all these things have happened. Now, he was also, another issue was in the formative period between 86 to 90, he was gradually, he saw both parts of the world. He was witnessing the conversion of Christianity on the one hand. So there was interference in their religious system. And also, he was also witnessing what was happening to the agrarian structure. So he was very, I would say that although his education was not that much in comparison to tribal leaders in subsequent period, like people like Ramdal, Munda and others, but he was very perceptive. That impresses me most. He was very perceptive. So therefore, he was very conscious about the insight of the agrarian question that matters most. As far as the religious issue is concerned, he was interested in the revival of the traditional tribal cultures which were affected by the onslaught of Christianity. Now that's very interesting. He became a Christian and he came back to his traditional fold. That's a very unique example. Hardly one comes across such kind of examples in case of others. Now, there was what you call the Junta Kati system among the Mundas, as far as the land system is concerned, which meant that there was joint holding of land among the Mundas. But with the advent of the British, the Jamindars replaced these Junta Kati systems, and therefore these Jamindars became the instrument of exploitation, and they were the kind of Dikus or outsiders. But in 1894, Birsa Munda organized people, and he asked people not to pay the taxes and the debts of the money lenders. He was arrested and he had to spend 2 years in jail. He was arrested in 1895, then he was in jail for 2 years in 1897. Now, in 1898, to a place, I think Thutia or something like that, and he said that there was a temple, and he said that this temple belongs to the Kols. Now, see, the point is, he was trying to assert the tribal rights, not merely in terms of their, as far as economic resources are concerned, but also the cultural property. Try to understand. This is, so one can understand this because, therefore, one cannot just say that he was more interested in the economic exploitation or something like that. Because the tribal culture is basically a culturally embedded situation. Therefore, one has to understand Birsa Munda in this kind of sort of holistic perspective. 1899, around Christmas, all of us know 7,000 men and women, they were assembled to herald what he called Ulgulan or revolution, which spread to Khunti, Tamar and Ranchi. Now, their target were not only the police stations, they were targets also the Anglican missions at Mukhu and Roman Catholic mission at Sarwada. And he argued that the real enemy were the British, not the Christian Mundas. This is very perceptive idea one has to appreciate. And then in, I think on June 1st, on 5th of June, Birsa Munda's followers killed 2 constables at KD. On 7th June, they attacked the Khunti police station, and the local commissioner, A. Foves, and the deputy commissioner, S.C. Streetfield, they rushed to Khunti and they crushed the rebellion. They defeated the Mundas, but then Birsa escaped. But subsequently, he was arrested at Jamkopal forest on 3rd February 1900, and he died on 9th June in jail, suffering from cholera in 1900. Now, this is in brief his life. But then coming to his legacy, I think my dear friend will be speaking about the literary imagination later. So I'm not going to in details into it. To me, he was and he is a source of inspiration for all tribal movements, right from 1900 to anywhere. The fact that the government of India has decided to observe his birthday at the Janjatiya Gaurav Divas is also an important legacy. I think Mahasweta Devi's historical fiction, Aranyer Adhikar. This is very important because this was published in 1977, and in 1979, Mahasweta Devi is getting the Sahitya Academy Award. My distinguished panelists will be speaking more on this, therefore I'm not going to speak anything on this further. But then it is worthwhile to mention that Mahasweta Devi's Aranyer Adhikar created such an imprint that she had to write an abridged version on Birsa Munda for the young readers. Now, there are so many institutions or are in the memory of Birsa Munda Airport, Birsa Munda Institute of Technology, Birsa Munda Banvasi, Chhatrabas, Sidokano, Birsa University. All these things are there. But not only that, there are films on Birsa Munda, made in 2004, 2008, and I am told that some Tamil films are being in the process of being made. But in 2020, there is also a biographical film, Bhagwan Birsa Munda by Rojan Khosa. All these show that people are now gradually interested to know about the mysterious revolutionary called Birsa Munda. Thus, to conclude, Birsa Munda to me is a symbol for unsung heroes and heroines of Indian freedom struggle. He is a cynosure of bravery and dissent against exploitation of tribals in colonial and post-colonial area. He is a protector of and preserver of tribal cultures against the onslaught of Christianity. And the most important thing is, to me, I think the Principal Secretary highlighted this, is that when we are talking of environmental degradation, I think he is also a symbol of green existence or green social life. To me, additionally, he represents a paradigm shift with regard to the attitude of India's mainstream population towards tribals. Usually, the mainstream population harbor a condescending attitude that the tribals have to learn from the mainstream population. Birsa Munda's life and legacy demonstrate that the mainstream population has to learn many things from such unsung heroes like Birsa Munda. It is time we acknowledge this issue openly and candidly in order to strengthen the composite culture of India's heritage. Thank you for giving me this unique opportunity.
Thank you, Professor Basa. In fact, Professor Sahai has been disconnected. I think he's trying to join back again. But thank you so much. He has heard your lecture and definitely he's going to sum up. Without waiting for him, I think we will request our next panelist, a young panelist, in fact, Professor Sumohan Bandyopadhyay, Professor in Anthropology and Director, Center for Adivasi Studies, Vidyasagar University, to give his talk. But before that, I would request our person over here to please give a brief introduction about Professor Bandyopadhyay.
After listening to Professor K.K. Basa and his scholarly address on Birsa Munda's life and legacy, now we are awaiting with all eagerness to listen to Professor Sumohan Bandyopadhyay. Professor Sumohan Bandyopadhyay is currently the professor in the Department of Anthropology, Vidyasagar University, and also holds the position of Director of Adivasi Studies and Museum, Vidyasagar University. Science with specialization in social cultural anthropology from University of Calcutta. He was first class past gold medalist in Master of Science and was awarded PhD from Vishwa Bharati in the year 2007. Professor Bandyopadhyay worked as former research officer, Indian Anthropological Society, and was also a fellow, Anthropological Survey of India. He has been a guest faculty in University of Calcutta, Anthropology, Rabindra Bharati University, Museology, Post-Graduation Department of Bengali Women's College, University of Calcutta, and West Bengal State University. Professor Bandyopadhyay has also worked for some time in the state civil service as deputy magistrate and deputy collector. His research interests include history of anthropology, theoretical anthropology, anthropology of religion and art, development anthropology and folklore, with many other related issues. He has 5 books to his credit. Some of them include Samajik, Sanskritik, Debachan, and Life and Lore, Anthropological Reflections, Prasanga Adivasi. He has more than 40 papers in national and international journals, including Anthropological Notebooks, Asian Ethnicity, Asian Ethnology, the Eastern Anthropologist, the Oriental Anthropology, Indian Anthropologist, Journal of the Indian Anthropological Society, South Asian Anthropologist, Man in India, so many. Professor Bandyopadhyay is the editor, Man in India and Associate Managing Editor, Journal of the Indian Anthropological Society. In all fairness, we now await to listen to the erudite address by Professor Suman Bandyopadhyay.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon. First of all, I would convey my sincere regards to SC, ST, RTI, Odisha, Government of Odisha, and particularly to Professor A.B. Ota sir for inviting me. I also convey my regards to the chair, Professor Vijay S. Sahai sir, and also my co-panelist, Professor K.K. Basa sir, Professor S.N. Munda sir, and also my dear Gunja. And it is a very rewarding situation in a sense, but at the same time, when my talk is scheduled after some of the most illustrious anthropologists of India, it is a pretty challenging task for a speaker to deliver something new, because the things have already been communicated, which I was somehow planning to communicate before you, but still I shall try my best. Today we are paying homage to the great leader Bhagwan Birsa Munda on his 146th Jayanti, and this has been declared as Janajatiya Gaurav Divas, and we are particularly discussing his contribution to the national freedom struggle. My presentation is broadly revolving within this theme with a special reference to the creative, imaginative impact of this movement on literature, particularly Bengali literature. And the title of my presentation will be Contributions of Bhagwan Birsa Munda to India's Freedom Struggle for Independence and Shaping of a Literary Imagination in Bengal. And I have planned to outline my discussion with a brief reference to Birsa's life, and then we shall pass on to his movement and its impact, its nature, its lessons for us. And this impact has been divided, one on the socio-political or impact of national freedom struggle, and another on the literary imagination. So this is in brief the outline of my lecture. And before going to that, I would like to make some point clear, which are the cardinal points of my presentation, my deliberation, is that the movement has been categorized. This movement of Birsa Munda has been categorized as a revitalization movement, nativistic movement, millenarian movement, messianic movement, and it was later categorized by some other scholars for example, Professor L.K. Mahapatra, into different types of movements, and these movement will occupy one of these categories. Say, for example, L.K. Mahapatra divided the social movements into 3 types: reactionary, conservative, and revolutionary movement. Professor Surajit Chandra Sinha gave a 5-fold classification of social movement. Number 1 is ethnic rebellion. Number 2, reform movement. Number 3, political movement within the Indian Union. Number 4, secessionist movement. And number 5, agrarian movement. Now, coming to some other scholars, for example, Ghanasham Shaho, he has also given us 5 types of social movements. Now, my point is that these type of classification, while we place with regard to movement like Birsa Munda, it is somehow problematic, because the movement of Birsa Munda may be classified into the several types. And for example, our holistic understanding of tribal life also necessitates that understanding tribal movement should have a holistic perspective, because all their different aspects of their life are integrated. So our understanding of the tribal movement must come from that, must originate from that understanding or that approach. This is the first point I would like to make. Secondly, that these type of movement and they relate to the extreme poverty of the people, their predicament, and we find that still those issues are forming the cardinal points of tribal movement in the later years, and tribal relationship to the state, and also the major tribal problems. So this importance of tribal movement and the factors thereof are to be judged in the perspective of contemporary tribal situation. Secondly, so far as the impact of this tribal movement is concerned, I must say that it is highly symbolic in nature. The impact is highly symbolic in nature. Already Birsa sir has pointed out that there was a different type of appropriation of this movement, the cultural appropriations, and through different cultural apparatus, one of which, of course, through literature that I have tried to refer to in this discussion. And apart from that, there are different ways of appropriation, and most of them are symbolic impact. And relating to this understanding, I must say another argument that this type of movement or this type of socio-religious movement, as K. Singh has termed it, are mostly ideological battle. These are movement of ideas, and there are certain metaphysical content, and this metaphysical reasoning you cannot wipe out, you cannot do away with if we try to understand this type of movement. Number 3, that this movement also portrays a kind of tribal's desire for, tribal's march for, yearning for a good, purified life, idea of good life among the tribals. And if we see what Birsa, in the form of like a 10 commandments type of thing that some scholars have identified, have mentioned certain prescriptions for his people, that the giving up of animal sacrifice, monotheism, that only one God, Singh Bonga, chaste and pure life, cleanliness, no intoxicant intake of intoxicants, and also wearing of sacred threads. So all these things, these prescriptions, for a purified good life also reflects the tribal's idea of good life. So a kind of our understanding of exotic, so-called quote unquote, though I do not use this word, primitive, exotic kind of understanding of tribal. This is not the actual picture, because this kind of tribal aspiration was also reflected in this movement. And another thing is that it's a kind of subjective experience. All the factors that have been identified by the scholars responsible for the Birsa Munda's revolt or tribal revolt are part of Birsa's subjective experience. So these are the major points of my understanding of this movement. I shall try to substantiate these with some evidences, some facts and figures. But at the same time, I would like to add that this movement will also enlighten us, will also prompt us to take a look at the environmental history of the country from a new angle. We talk about the Bisnoi, but when we refer it, link it to some literary imagination, we see that the emphasis on forest. So it's a kind of, if we, and I know that the colonial rule was watershed in the history of environment in our country. So it is somehow linked to the environmental movement of our country. So with these few words, let us come to the major, the main discussion that I was trying to bring before us. That well, I can remember one very interesting poem by a legendary Bengali poet, Gyanpit winner Shankar Ghosh. Shankar Ghosh wrote in his Dhum Legechi Hrit Kamale, the name of the book is that, and there was a poem. Let me tell it in recite it in Bengali first, then I shall try and make a bumbling effort in English, incompetent attempt though. That is, Amar Dewale Pit. Shankar Ghosh was writing in his poem. Amar Dewale Pit, amake বাঁচতেই হবে তাই, আমার চোখের রক্তে সবার চোখের গান গায়। দেখো রে মানুষ দেখো, 21 শতকে চলে দেশ, আমার মৃত্যুরও নাই, আমার জন্মেরও নাই শেষ। So this idea of life which percolates through the tribal life, to the tribal movement, will be echoed. Let us see how it is echoed. That this unending nature of this immortality, vitality, that is very important. And in my incompetent translation of that pressed back to the world, still I must live by. With my bleeding eyes, I sing the music of every eye. See, man, 21st century comes, our country marches on. I take birth again and again, not to die alone. So leaders like Birsa are some legendary persons whose legacy lives on. We know that he was born in an extremely poverty-stricken family, like most other families in the region. Getting a square meal of rice a day was a dream to these families. They had to be content with ghato, a sort of gruel made of grass seeds. Sometimes even salt to eat this gruel was a scarcity. amid such a penury, Birsa was growing up like other Munda boys. And then we know that he was sent to his father's maternal uncle's village, maternal mother's village, father's mother's village. Then he was sent to Chaibasha Mission School. By this time, his father, elder brother, were converted to Christianity, including Birsa himself. But within 2 years, Birsa could realize the kind of works was on in the name of imparting instructions. And there was a very interesting saying that Saheb ek topi hai. So all the foreign white men were seen in Birsa's eye, because he could understand that the missionaries as well as the administrator were playing the same tune. So he was, after protesting a misdemeanor of missionary teacher, he was expelled, and later he returned to his village and began consolidating the Munda people. During this time, he initially took to a kind of petition and submission to the British authority to remit their dues, and he himself led one such deputation, taking the riots of Sigrida to Chaibasha. But all their appeals went in vain, fell in deaf ears. Then it gradually moved, they gradually consolidated. They could understand that these type of appeal will not result any good for them, and there was two-way preparation. One was organization for a revolt, and the second thing was a kind of religious consolidation, religious teaching. So this way, his movement, as I have already mentioned, that it has a strong religious element, but you cannot compartmentalize it. And this type of understanding, that what I was saying, a metaphysical reasoning of Birsa's personality, was important in this context. But I would not like to elaborate the factors and other things that culminated into this movement, because these have already been pointed out by our respected panelists and keynote speaker. So just to mention that all these factors were being subjectively experienced by Birsa himself and his people, and this way they gradually moved into revolt. There was bloody battle, and it is to be noted that if we take the nature of freedom movement of the country at the time, for example, national movement, that there was also a shift from a kind of appeal, moderate to extremism, but there were very few examples of such kind of armed battle, face-to-face confrontation, except some clandestine attacks. In this regard, I would like to mention that the tribals are the first citizens who revolted in armed battle and face-to-face confrontations with the British and staked their claim and asserted their rights over the land and forest. So during this period, we see now, if we see that his movement took place, there was revolt, there was face-to-face confrontation. Some of the, including Birsa, were arrested. Some of the freedom fighters were arrested, and they were sent to the jail. Now let's see what impact did these events make on the contemporary nationalist leadership, contemporary freedom fighter and nationalist leaders. One of them was Rashtraguru Surendranath Bandyopadhyay. We know that S.N. Banerjee, Surendranath Bandyopadhyay ran a paper called the Bengali. And this paper, through its coverage on the movement, stood by the side of these tribal fighters. And one of its reporting, because this type of reporting was difficult in those days, so they had to take some precautions. Still, they are caught in by the Britishers and also sentenced several punishment. But one such report published on 2nd March in the Bengali newspaper in page number 6, 2nd March of 1900, that the trial of the Munda rebels. If we see the wording of this reporting, we see that how this movement was being looked at. This movement was being primarily taken as an agrarian revolt, and among the British administrator, it was a kind of riot. And when Birsa was arrested for the first time, he was booked under CPC 505. So you can see by this way the nature of looking at this movement. And this reporting, which said that the government, the end of the reporting is that the correspondent also added that the government is not anxious that its mismanagement and fatuity culminating in a big agrarian rising. So they are directly charging government for doing this kind of, taking this type of measure against the rebellious tribals. And they were also reporting that these rebellions, these rebels, quote unquote, may be hurried into the jail without attracting attention to the misgovernment which provoked them into open defiance of law. So the nationalist leadership have also took this point that they also mobilized the common sentiment towards the corrupt British legal system. This is very interesting thing, and they also consolidated the nationalist sentiment in favor of these rebels. And we see that Birsa was later also, some of the followers of Birsa took to nationalist movement, and we also find that the Birsa and Gandhi were also hailed by their followers, nationalist followers. There was one such song in which it was said that, "Oh mother, like the rising sun, Gandhi was born. Like the rising moon, Birsa had come up. Oh mother, Gandhi was born for Swaraj. Birsa had come up to put the Mundas on their feet." So Gandhi and Birsa Munda, Swaraj and the book Munda identity, Munda autonomy were being uttered in the same platform. And we also know that these idea of Birsa Jayanti, the Birsa Day, was also observed by some of the nationalist leaders. So in this way, we see a kind of nationalist sentiment that was gathered around Birsa and his movement. And this type of appropriation, this type of understanding of this movement just presented before us a kind of multivalency, and which Daniel Roycroft has mentioned through his study of the photographs of Birsa Munda, that to the nationalist, it was a kind of image of vitality and divinity. So that I was talking about a kind of the ideological import of this movement, that is very important. The symbolic impact of this movement, it is very important. And at the same time, he became a kind of symbol of protest, And this is again linked with some theoretical perspective as Duvalet's concept of culture of protest. And it moved between two theoretical paradigms of resistance and assimilation. So these are very important at the same time. And at the same time, it has also been a case of identization of the Munda people. It is not that the Munda rebels asked for the freedom of the country, but by their intention to drive away the foreign rules, the British administrator, and to get rid of this foreign alien power, they were very much akin in their sentiment to the later nationalist fighters and freedom fighters of the country. Now, this again is taken us that Bashar sir was talking about a kind of post-colonial scholarship was emerging to assess the Birsa Munda's movement, and also the subaltern historians are talking about it, talking about a kind of looking at Birsa from bottom up. And in this way, it is being stated that the religious understanding, the idea of religion, Dhartiyaba, and the Messiah, all these are part of Adivasi consciousness. And as a whole, this Adivasi consciousness consolidated to portray a kind of counter-hegemonic strategy. Now, coming to Mahashweta Devi's novel, she has also pointed to that counter-hegemonic point, but she categorically mentioned about the importance of Birsa's struggle as a kind of modernization, a modernization movement, as a modernization of the Munda people that Birsa wanted to effect, rather I should say. And this particular modernization project, I think, is also linked to a project of decolonization, since the Birsa Munda wanted to get rid of the dominant British symbols, get rid of and also symbolically destroyed the images of British Empire. One such incident has been depicted in the novel, where on the day of Holi, some Mundas have assembled around a trunk of plantain trunk in the Simbua hills, and they were cutting down that trunk of plantain, and they at the same time Birsa was telling his people that this plantain trunk symbolizes the Queen of England, and we shall cut down the head of Mundadari and bring an end to the reign of Ravana. So at one point it was a kind of Mundadari Ravana, Hindu mythological import. There were also when he was calling it the British Empire as a kingdom of demon, he was taking some other symbolic identities. And we can see that in his religious identities, there were a number of elements drawn from different religious faith and positions. So by this way, this religion and religious and socio-religious identity that were linked, integrated to the political movement, gave Mundas a kind of consolidation, which Mahashweta has called a Mundari Oiko. And this Mundari Oiko, Munda identity, was important, and through this Mundari Oiko, Birsa wanted to overcome, to destroy. He knew that there was a mighty power against them, but still a kind of metaphysical halo that he wanted to create, cast such an overarching influence over the Mundari people, credulous Mundari people, that they could take the challenge of fighting against these mighty rulers. And in this way, by using these symbols and also denouncing the faith of Christianity and also their political overlordship, there was a kind of decolonization strategy. If we see the movement of Birsa, and if we try to analyze the movement of Birsa Munda in that way. Due to constraint of time, and I would not like to take much more time, I have to conclude by saying from where I started that the call for life, that unending life of Birsa Munda's legacy, the immortality of Birsa Munda, and the novel rightly concludes that the mortal remains of Birsa might be obliterated, but not the moral essence that keeps the flag of struggle fluttering high. She captures, Mahashweta Devi captures these sentiments nicely by writing a sentence repetitively. She used to write repetitively a particular sentence throughout his novel, which is 199 pages in length, distributed in 20 chapters, with an additional conclusion. And it was a unique kind of novel that also used the original documents to substantiate the imaginary practice of Birsa's legacy, which she considered basically a forest movement, a movement against the feudal and British rulers. At the same time, she also brought out the factors related to the origin of this movement, but at the same time, she harped on a kind of sentiment that was echoing time and again, written time and again in the text: the immortality of fight, the unending nature of fight. And the sentence which she wrote to pinpoint this was that Ul Gulaner Sheshnai Birshar Moronnai. There is no end to the great revolt. Birsa is immortal. So this immortality, Ul Gulaner Sheshnai Birsa is Birshar Moronnai. So where we started, that I take birth again and again, not to die alone. So this way, writer finally means that the significance of Birsa Munda and his struggle would remain unflagging as long as the atrocities on the tribal people persist and their miseries run unabated. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Professor. Thank you so much, Professor Sumohan, for your nice talk. It was very lively, and your talk was with a difference. You have done lessons from various literature that you have widely read and quoted and analyzed the life and philosophy of Bhagwan Birsa Munda. Thank you very much. Next, the resource person will be Mr. Gunjal Ikir Munda. He's a very young, scholar, a social development resource. He's the son of the great Ramdayal Munda. He has continued his legacy, and we expect a lot from him. He is son of the soil. He is from Jharkhand. He's a Munda, and he has imbibed, the spirit of, the Munda legacy, I can tell you. Professor Munda will be speaking on life and ideas of Birsa in the contemporary world. But before, he is handed over the mic to speak, I think we have to give a little bit of background about him to all our esteemed, participants. Yes.
Kunjal Munda is presently the coordinator of spoken Munda language classes at Ranchi, Jharkhand, and also the project in charge of the Rumbul program Ranchi, jointly run by Tata Steel Foundation. Kunjal had his double post-graduation in physics from Indian Institute of Technology, Roorkee, and in folklorics from Central University of Jharkhand, Ranchi, respectively. Kunjal worked as assistant professor at Center for Endangered Languages, Central University of Jharkhand, Ranchi, from April 2008 to August 2021. He has done extensive documentation of Asur, Giricha, Birhor, Turi, Darwa languages also. Kunjal was also a guest faculty to Indira Gandhi National Center for the Arts, Ranchi Regional Center from October 2020 to February 2021, and taught on topics related to tribes and tribal arts to the students of postgraduate diploma in tribal arts. Kunjal is a top musician, cultural activist, folklorist, language activist, documenter, and academician. His research interest includes tribal art, culture, and endangered language in particular. He has number of publications to his credit and has participated in various national and international seminars on tribal art, literature, and culture. I would like to request Kunjal Munda to kindly address the conversation.
Yeah, thank you very much. Am I audible to all?
Yeah, you are.
Okay.
You are audible.
Yeah. First of all, Johar, and thank you to all, especially TRI Odisha, Professor Rota, whom I know spoke for the first time a couple of weeks back. And though we have not met, probably our paths have met, and I'm very happy to be with all of you. First of all, before I begin my short talk, I want to apologize for two things. First of all, today, since on the occasion of Birsa Jayanti, things are quite hectic, and well, I am not in my usual place from where I can, give a lecture or talk to people in silence, or when I'm at peace of my mind. I'm in the middle of a program, a cultural program. So occasionally, if you hear a drum beat or a Shahnai being played, just try to ignore it. So that was one of my first things for which I was asking apology. Second thing is that since all the big people, the dignitaries have spoken before me, and my talk would be quite unstructured because most of the points have been covered by people, but still I'd like to that helps. My picture is visible to me. So the points which probably have not been covered by other people, I'd like to talk a few things about them. And again, I'd like to thank all the people for inviting me, and a happy Birsa Jayanti to all of you. So all the talk which have been going on by the persons before me, puts this talk in a very crucial position, puts this whole program, this whole webinar, because all the places where we talk about Birsa and his movement, or the movement of the tribals, we generally have the tendency to, blame the happenings or the misfortunes, on people who are not present amongst us. For example, we have the tendency to blame all the things upon the Britishers, which I mean they were and they are, at a quite a prominent place where we can put all our blames on them. But this particular webinar, puts very much emphasis on the exploitation by the Dikus. By Dikus, if we talk in layman's term, it will be kind of saying anyone who is an outsider, who is not a tribal, is a Diku. But that's a very superficial understanding of things. Diku, in my talks, in this talk, I'd like to more emphasize on the ideological part of being a Diku. Diku does not only mean being an outsider. If that would have been, then the works which have been done on Birsa, by Kumar Suresh Singh or by Mashata Devi, they were the ones probably who pulled out Birsa from the darkness. People know about him because of these two people who, if we talk about Diku, in layman's term, they would be. But, ideologically, a Diku can be anyone, even a tribal can be a Diku, if his philosophy, his way of approaching life, is not in consensus with the community. So having touched upon the word Diku, and in fact, all the previous speakers before me, they have emphasized on this word. I'd like to start this whole talk of mine from the Diku perspective. From there only, I think Birsa, we can understand Birsa better. So whatever we have heard till now from the other speakers, about the whole reason for Birsa and his movement coming up in response to exploitation by the Dikus. So in fact, two things were being threatened by the exploiters as such. One was definitely land. It was one of the most physically attributed things. You could see people coming in and grabbing away their lands, and which in fact was directly linked to the survival of the community, to the families, to the persons. And the second thing which generally we don't notice is that the tribals' way of life was being threatened. So in fact, these two things probably were the reasons why the movement, the Birsa's movement, rose. And in fact, now that we have a pretty good understanding of the factors which led to Birsa's movement, and since we are looking at Birsa as a rising icon among the tribals, and recently the central government also declared Birsa's birth day as Janjatiya Gaurav Divas, so we definitely see an icon of Birsa, emerging. It was emerging for quite some time, but now a pan-national outlook is being assumed by Birsa. So in the course of making Birsa an icon, we tend to put more emphasis on things which have superficial or just physical importance. And while we talk about Birsa and his life, there are a few points which comes up repetitively, and which knowingly or unknowingly is standing against Birsa's own ideology, or if we could say that it's standing against the tribal ideology. So I'll try to mix both the things which we can see, can think about, and the things behind it, the philosophy of those things happening. So the first thing which I'd like to talk about, while making an icon out of Birsa, we are then generally told that his birthplace was Ulihatu. Ulihatu is the native place of Birsa, where his father, his forefather, had been living there for generations. It stems from the very thought, that a person is only owned by the paternal side of his family, which is very much against the tribal traditions. If a person is born, well, definitely he's a person of the whole community, but his first right, let's say his the claim over him, would be more. The claim over him meaning culturally is more by the maternal uncle's side. But the mother's side is more involved in all the cultural ceremonies and other things. In fact, even in today's life, whenever a person is getting married among the tribals, his marriage would be incomplete if his mother's side people won't come. Even if a person dies, the people generally wait for their maternal uncles to come before he's given a burial. So in this context, Birsa's birthplace, it's contested, but in fact, the folklore among the Munda people, they claim or they emphasize more on his birth being in his father's maternal uncle's place, that's Chalkad. In fact, Chalkad was one of the most important centers during his whole movement, where so as to speak, his Birsite religion came into existence in that particular village. So the very idea of associating a person with only his father's side, that's very much against the whole philosophy or the ethos of tribal thinking. A person definitely belongs to the whole community, but he is claimed more by his mother's side culturally. So while making an icon out of Birsa, or while talking about Birsa, we generally tend to forget the contributions made by the female side, the female aspect of the community. So definitely the people who would be listening today, or whenever research takes place on these things, I do sincerely hope that people generally don't forget the philosophical aspect of the tribe, or the philosophical aspect of Birsa while they talk about him. The second thing which generally we all say, but we generally don't realize when we say about Birsa Bhagwan, we generally associate him with Bhagwan. Some people generally say him as just Birsa Munda without associating any honorific thing like Bhagwan Birsa Munda, which is fine by me. I mean, amongst the tribals or amongst the Mundas, all our ancestors are our Bhagwan. There's nothing as such, that you need to place a special emphasis on a person so as to deify him. All our ancestors who are no longer with us, they are given a place of a god, a spirit. So in that sense, amongst the tribals also, we at times questions amongst us whether he should be called a Bhagwan or he should not be called a Bhagwan. In fact, the answer would be, all our ancestors are Bhagwan to us. Although the word Bhagwan might not be a native word, but the equivalent would be our ancestral spirits, or kind of deity. So when we talk about him as Bhagwan, the relation between a Bhagwan and the normal people in the mainstream sort of thought, would be we would be asking some favors from the Bhagwan, and the Bhagwan would be granting us some. That is not the case in case of the tribal people. When we put our faith in our ancestors as being the Bhagwan or a spirit, they are more a family member to us than a god in the mainstream sense. So when we say Bhagwan to him, that does not mean that we pray to him for giving us or providing us something. It's just a gratitude to show to those dead ancestors, to those spirits, that whatever they did, they did for the good of us, and we are not asking anything in return. Generally, it's the tendency that we go and then pray and then we ask something, but that's not the case with the Bhagwan in the tribal sense. So whenever we speak about Birsa Munda as being a Bhagwan, let's not take it in the so-called mainstream sense. Bhagwan in the tribal sense would and has always meant a sense of equality. The Bhagwan is not being placed in a higher place. They are one among the people. So that was about Birsa being called a Bhagwan, and Bhagwan to us would be more like being a family member than placing a particular person at a very higher place. And finally, when we talk about Birsa's movement, although we have named the whole Urgulan thing on Birsa, but the tribal leadership only led by one person. In fact, we are lucky to have Birsa's life documented by the Britishers, but there were other people amongst whom Birsa was one, who contributed to the whole movement from behind the scenes. And unfortunately, their life and their work was not documented by any person. So we, for the time being, know only about Birsa, and hence it's Birsa's movement, Birsa's Urgulan. But when we look at the whole movement, there were many, many people who were involved in this movement, and we still refer to them in our prayers, in our festivals. We do name them. And in fact, this is the very essence of a tribal leadership, that no one person is given the whole authority to conduct a whole movement or conduct the whole whatever things may seem necessary to be. The movement was a collective, and definitely Birsa was one of the most prominent members. But giving all the credit only to Birsa would be extending this whole leadership thing too much. There were other people also, and the tribals today, even today, they remember those people alongside Birsa. So when we talk about making an icon out of Birsa, these things should be definitely kept in mind. That the very essence of what Birsa stood for might not be destroyed, while we make an icon of Birsa. So these were the three things which I wanted to convey, which forms the very essence of the tribal philosophy, and for which Birsa Munda stood up and he defended. And by course of trying to bring up a revival of whatever Birsa did, we should not forget these things for which Birsa himself stood. One thing definitely comes in my mind, that what was the difference between previous movement, like we definitely heard from previous speakers that Birsa's movement was not in isolation. It was a kind of continuity from the other movements, and these movements have been continuing since then. And we can also say that people are drawing inspiration even today from those movements, and the social movements which are happening today can be in fact termed can be in fact as classified as continuity of Birsa's movement even today, because Birsa's philosophy and the philosophy for which the tribals are struggling today, they match. So that's why probably Birsa's movement definitely should not be looked as an isolation. But what I want to emphasize here, that what was the difference between the previous movements and the Birsa's movement? Definitely from outside, we tribal would be looking like same. We would look like same. We all would look impoverished from material goods, etc., etc. But even amongst tribals, there's a difference between people in terms of material wealth. There is a bit of hierarchy, but not that much compared to other societies. So if you look at all the movements which preceded Birsa, they were mostly led by tribal chieftains, and they were quite powerful in their own places. And people rallied along those powerful leaders, be it the Tamar revolt or the coal movement in early 1800s. But Birsa's movement was different because Birsa, like we have already heard, belonged to not so well-to-do family. In fact, it has been said that while when he was born in Chalkat, his family had actually gone there to work as a common laborer. So Birsa definitely did not belong to a chieftain class, where he would be having the control or the authority over a village. Authority not in mainstream sense. The democracy amongst the tribals is very much different from whatever we have in our mind. It's not very authoritarian. It's quite liberal. So Birsa definitely was not belonging to a chief's family. He was very poor. So coming from that background, and then people relying around you, people rallying around you, it was one of the biggest achievement of Birsa. And probably he could do that because he could connect more to the life of the common people regarding the problems which they were facing, and the problem on more to do on a philosophical level, concerned with the loss of the way of life which the tribals were undergoing. So actually, he could probably more connect those problems more to the common people. That's why people rallied around him, and even the chiefs, after some time, they rallied around him. So probably that was the cause, which I think is the difference between the other movement. Both the movement were big in scale, and it affected people for a long time. But simply because Birsa belonged to a more humble background, probably his movement was more accepted even amongst the other tribes. Even today, if you try to trace the songs about Birsa in other languages, you'll find his songs being sung in his native tongue, Mundari, his songs being sung in Nagpuri, in Kuruk, in Santali, in Ho, in Bengali. In all the other regional languages, people have composed songs on him. So his effect was not confined to a particular tribe or a particular small area. Rather than his effect was, let's say, a regional one, which was quite significant compared to other movements which had taken place in those times. So that's I think one of the basic difference between the other movement and Birsa's movement, and also one of the key factor why his movement was more readily accepted by people. And finally, I'd like to talk about the aftermath of what happened after the Birsa's movement was over. In fact, the ripples of his movement can still be seen today. One of my good friend was doing PhD on Birsa's life, on the contemporary ideas of Birsa, from a well-known university abroad. We generally have the tendency to try to glorify things beyond reality, present a bigger than life picture of things. But the foreigners, they generally don't like it. So he began his thesis by saying that the roots of British authority were shook by Birsa's movement, which did not go well with the supervisor, and rightly so, because if you compare it with let's say 1857 first war of independence, then probably the whole newspapers and all the other things would have been covered by the revolt of the Indian sepoys. But for Birsa, probably एक minute. Yeah, just a moment. I'll be joining in 2 minutes. I'll have to change places probably. There's some problem here. Sorry for inconvenience. Yeah, sorry about that. So this good friend of mine, he actually said that his foreign supervisors were quite, did not accept the fact that the roots of the British imperialism were shook by Birsa's movement, and rightly so. Probably if he had been there in those times, then probably the newspapers would not have been flooded by Birsa's photo all around. But probably just a second. But what I'd like to say that uh, uh, his legacy still continues, and probably, probably his movement did not shake the roots of Britishers then, but the inspiration which he gave to his people, being from such a humble background, he took upon a nation or a big entity, who had its presence all around the world. That is in fact quite an achievement, and those very things, which Birsa stood for, people are still rallying behind him, taking inspiration from his struggle, from his ideas, and they are still agitating even today. Whenever people take out protest march, or whenever they ask for their rights, Birsa is at the center of things, and probably that's why Birsa has his acceptance amongst, in fact, all the political parties, regardless of their leanings. I mean, even the right, or even the left, or even the center. All the political thinkings. They are not in a position to deny Birsa or his ideology. That's in fact also very true about the church also, because at one point of time the church was pretty much against Birsa for quite some time, for quite a long time. But in the modern context, Birsa's ideology has grown to such an extent that we cannot imagine tribals without Birsa. And in fact, we have seen Birsa Jayanti being celebrated in missionary schools, in church compounds also. So I think Birsa movement, at historically speaking, would have been a small spark, but that small spark, has continued to enlighten us, and probably I think he will continue to enlighten us for a long time, and we'll continue to take inspiration from him, and we'll carry forward our movement. So saying this, very big thanks to TRI Odisha, Professor Rota, and all the other people who have this program being conducted so successfully. Thank you very much for inviting me.
Thank you, Mr. Munda. In fact, after hearing you, I can only tell you that you have spoken from your heart, soul, and mind. I think it is not bookish, and whatever you have said as a tribal, as an insider. The aspects that you have covered are hardly covered by, researchers, academicians, and so-called scholars who are not from tribal community. I really congratulate you. And now I can definitely see that probably there are so many unsung heroes, tribal heroes in the country, even amongst Mundas, who have not been focused, who have not been remembered, whose names are not there in the pages of history. I think they also need to be brought to the surface, for which Ministry of Tribal Affairs is trying hard to identify such unsung heroes and try to bring forth, their names and their contributions. But years of India's independence is being celebrated. Birsa Munda, of all the tribal heroes, probably occupies a separate place in the pages of history so far as the tribal freedom fighters are concerned. And there are so dimensions of Birsa Munda, some of which only has been told by you and other, esteemed panelists. I think various aspects need to be touched upon, and maybe a book, edited book can come out, which I'll discuss with you all, and we'll try to rope in more experts who really know about, Birsa Munda, particularly various aspects, and can come up with something before 15th of August 2022, so that a dedicated book gets released. You mentioned that somebody has done PhD on that, and you see it must have covered few aspects of it which probably has not been covered anywhere. So we'll try to hunt, and we'll try to give a 360-degree kind of coverage, and try to come up with a kind of book which I'll be in touch with all the experts. Thank you so much, Vijal Munda. I really liked it. You see, before we go on to the last speaker, last panelist, because we are running against time, is another, son of the soil, who is another, elite from Munda legacy, who will be speaking on Birsa Munda and his philosophy. This is no other than Professor Satyanarayan Munda, former Vice Chancellor of Dr. Syama Prasad Mukherjee University, Ranchi. Sir, before you, give your talk, I would request our gentleman over here to please speak few words about you, Professor Munda.
नमस्कार जोहार
सर थोड़ा आपके बारे में सर
was the Vice Chancellor of Dr. Syama Prasad Mukherjee University, Ranchi, and former Co-Vice Chancellor of Sidhu University, Dumka. Dr. Munda completed his post-graduation in anthropology and also was awarded PhD in anthropology from University of Ranchi. Dr. Munda served as the Professor Department of Anthropology, Ranchi University. He was the head of the Department of Anthropology, Ranchi College, Ranchi since 1999 to 2014. He has supervised around 10 PhD students, of which 5 have been awarded. He has supervised and guided the students of anthropology from different states, from Chhattisgarh, Odisha, Rajasthan, Uttarakhand, Bihar, Jharkhand, and so many other states of India in the field of tribal development management and sociology since 1980. He has authored 3 books. 2 of the books have been published: Jharkhand Ki Birsa and Vikas, and third one is under publication. He has edited and peer-reviewed many research journals of international review and has more than 2 dozen articles published in research journals of review. Dr. Munda has attended more than 6 dozen national, international seminars, conferences, symposiums, and workshops, and presented his papers. Dr. Munda has been a member of academic and government bodies and has made valuable contribution to anthropology. He is the executive committee member and former joint secretary of the Ranchi College and Post-Graduation Teachers Association, Ranchi University since last 2 decades. Now we request Commissioner Dr. Satyanam Munda to please address the congregation.
आप सभी को नमस्कार, जोहार, धन्यवाद, गुड आफ्टरनून। बिरसा जयंती के अवसर पर ये हमारे जो इस वेबिनार के अध्यक्ष प्रोफेसर विजय शंकर साय जी को बहुत बहुत धन्यवाद कि उनके माध्यम से ही हमको प्रोफेसर एबी ओटा के साथ परिचित होने का मौका मिला। तो ओटा साहब को भी बहुत बहुत धन्यवाद कि उन्होंने हमको मौका दिए कि इस वेबिनार में सम्मिलित होने के लिए। तो मैं इसके संबंध में कहना चाहूंगा कि ये जो पुनः आजादी का अमृत महोत्सव के आलोक में विभिन्न जो फ्रीडम फाइटर्स हैं उनके बारे में चर्चाएं हो रही है, इसलिए भारत सरकार को और नरेंद्र मोदी जी को भी बहुत धन्यवाद देता हूं। और इसी के आलोक में जनजातीय गौरव दिवस भी हम लोग मना रहे हैं। ये बहुत खुशी की बात है कि जनजातीय गौरव दिवस मनाने के आलोक में बिरसा के संबंध में या तो और दूसरे जो हमारे फ्रीडम फाइटर्स हैं उनके बारे में जानने का मौका मिल रहा है। तो जैसा कि हम लोग तभी से चर्चा कर रहे हैं, हम लोग एक शुरुआत से बिरसा मुंडा के बारे में चर्चा कर रहे हैं। तो बिरसा मुंडा का जन्म 15 नवंबर 1875 ईस्वी को हुआ और इनका जन्म ऐसे समय में हुआ जब यहाँ पर एक्सप्लॉयटेशन डायरेक्ट और इनडायरेक्ट रूप से हो रहा था। अब पूरे जमीन से संबंधित एक्सप्लॉयटेशन जो कि अंग्रेजों के माध्यम से या इनडायरेक्ट रूप से यहाँ के लोगों के माध्यम से भी शोषण हो रहा था बड़ी जोर। तो उस समय में बिरसा मुंडा का जन्म हुआ। तो बिरसा मुंडा का जहाँ तक सवाल है, बिरसा मुंडा के जो पिताजी हैं गरीबी की अवस्था में इधर उधर घूमते रहे। इसी आलोक में उन्हें सिंजुड़ी के बम्बा में बिरसा मुंडा का जन्म बिरसा की ओर हुआ, अर्थात जंगल की ओर हुआ। और बिरसा मुंडा को पूरे ट्राइबल कल्चर के बारे में, मुंडा कल्चर के बारे में जानने का मौका मिला। यहाँ के कस्टम, ट्रेडिशन, फोकलोर, फोक क्विज, फोक सॉन्ग्स, इकोनॉमी व्यवस्था, इसी तरह से एजुकेशन सिस्टम, अन्य सभी के बारे में जानने का मौका मिला। और जैसे कि ट्राइबल बच्चों में होता है उसी के तहत बिरसा मुंडा वहां पर गाय बैल चराया करते थे, बांसुरी बजाते थे। अखड़ा को देखने का मौका मिला और अखड़ा के साथ साथ वहां पर जो वाद्य यंत्र है, टुईला जिसको कहा जाता है, कद्दू से बनाया जाता है, उसको बनाया करते थे। तो इसमें मैं कहना चाहूंगा कि यंग जनरेशन के जो लोग हैं, हमारे जो यंग जनरेशन के लोग हैं, इनका बिरसा मुंडा के माध्यम से या तो दूसरे जो फ्रीडम फाइटर्स हैं उसके माध्यम से, या तो पूरा जो हम लोग आजादी का अमृत महोत्सव मना रहे हैं, या तो जनजातीय गौरव दिवस मना रहे हैं, उसके माध्यम से हमारे जो यंग जनरेशन के जो लोग हैं उनको क्या करना चाहिए, इस पर फोकस करने की जरूरत है। जैसा कि आप देखते हैं, ये जो सिंपल सोसाइटी से संबंधित लोग ट्रेडिशनल ढंग से आप उनको देखेंगे। हालांकि आज मशीनरी युग में काफी परिवर्तन हुआ है, उसके बावजूद जो पहले के जो लोग हैं या तो मुंडा सोसाइटी से संबंधित लोग हैं, 3 बजे उठते थे और उन्होंने खेत बनाया, जंगल को बचाया, डोभा बनाया, तालाब बनाया। तो इन सबको देखने का मौका बिरसा मुंडा को भी मिला। तो इसी तरह से पूरा जो होल कल्चर है, जैसे यहाँ पर कई एक तरह के खेल हैं, जैसे फौदी खेल है। फौदी खेल में 1-2 आदमी से लेकर के एक साथ हजारों आदमी एक साथ खेल सकते हैं, लेकिन इसमें धीरे धीरे डिटोरिएशन हो गया या तो बिल्कुल ही समाप्त हो गया। तो इसी तरह से और भी कई एक खेल हैं, भावरा है, बीती है, जिसके माध्यम से गिनती करने का मौका मिलता है, गिनती करना सीखते हैं। तो मेरे कहने का मतलब है, ये जो ट्राइबल सिस्टम के माध्यम से या तो सिंपल सोसाइटी के माध्यम से हम क्या अचीव कर सकते हैं, अर्थात पूरे दुनिया के लोग, आप यदि देखेंगे पूरे दुनिया के लोग या तो इंडिया के लोग, ये बिल्कुल ही ट्रेडिशनल जो भारत है या तो ट्रेडिशनल लेवल में पूरे दुनिया के लोग नेचर से जुड़े हुए रहे हैं, नेचर से जुड़े हुए रहे हैं, क्योंकि नेचर के माध्यम से उनका सर्वाइवल हुआ है और इसीलिए नेचर का रिस्पेक्ट करते हैं। आप देखेंगे कि जैसे अलग अलग एरिया में अलग अलग तरह की विशेषता हैं, जंगल एरिया है, आइलैंड्स एरिया है, मरुभूमि एरिया है, अंटार्कटिका प्रदेश एरिया है, तो वहां पर अलग अलग तरह के कल्चर है सर्वाइवल के पॉइंट ऑफ व्यू से। अब जहां तक बिरसा मुंडा की हम बात करते हैं, उनको देखने का मौका मिला है। हमारा जो ट्रेडिशनल जो भारत है, हमारे ट्रेडिशनल भारत में लगभग अभी भी जो एंथ्रोपोलॉजिस्ट है उनका कहना है कि 632 प्रकार की जनजातियां हैं या तो सरलतम समाज से संबंधित लोग हैं। तो हमारे ट्रेडिशनल भारत में आप देखेंगे बिल्कुल ही विलेज सेटलमेंट के क्रम में जगह जगह पर लोगों ने जंगल छोड़ा है, जिसको अलग अलग नामों से जानते हैं। सरना, सरना, बासरना, बुरसरना, चांडी सरना, देसावली सरना, उत्तुर सरना इत्यादि के नाम से जानते हैं। और उनका जो कॉन्सेप्ट है, उनका जो फिलोसफी है, उनका जो सोच है, ये कहते हैं कि अपनी भाषा में कहते हैं, सरना रे दारू कबो में गया, सरना का पेट नहीं काटेंगे, दा का गमाया वर्षा नहीं होगी। ये कहते हैं जाहिर रे दारू कबो में गया, जाहिर का पेट नहीं काटेंगे, कुला चांकी हुआ है, बाघ का आक्रमण होगा, कुला जोम हुआ है, बाघ हमें खा जाएंगे। इसी तरह से ये कहते हैं देसावली सरना रे दारू कबो में गया, होया दा बराबरी का तैना, देसावली सरना का पेड़ नहीं काटेंगे, वातावरण का असंतुलन। इस तरह से कई एक उनका सोच है, लेकिन धीरे धीरे समय के परिवर्तन के आलोक में अपने लैंग्वेज को भी धीरे धीरे भूल रहे हैं। इसलिए ये सिंपल सोसाइटी से संबंधित लोग, उनका क्या कॉन्सेप्ट है अपनी भाषा में, हाजरा की भाषा के दृष्टिकोण से पूरे भारतवर्ष के लोगों को कई भागों में बांटा जा सकता है। ऑस्ट्रो स्टेटिक लिंग्विस्टिक फैमिली, आग्नेय भाषा परिवार या मुंडा भाषा परिवार, जैसे इसके अंतर्गत मुंडा, हो, संथाल, खड़िया, बिरहोर, बिरजिया, माली, गोड़ायत, खेरवार, कोरवा, लोधा, जुआंग इत्यादि कई कम्युनिटी के लोग होते हैं। तो कहने का मतलब है, ये जो अपनी भाषा को नहीं भूलते, तो जन जागरूकता की भावना पैदा की जा सकती है, उनमें अवेयरनेस की भावना पैदा की जा सकती है कि उनका जो कस्टम है, ट्रेडिशन है, फोकलोर है, फोकवेज है, और भी दूसरी चीजें हैं, उनके माध्यम से कैसे जागरूक किया जा सकता है। लेकिन अफसोस की बात है, दुख की बात है कि हम अपनी भाषा को धीरे धीरे भूल रहे हैं, जिसके कारण जो यहाँ का जो कोर कल्चर है, यहाँ के जो मूल विशेषताएं हैं, दवा, दारू, मेडिसिन से संबंधित या तो अन्य, जैसे आप देखेंगे यहाँ का गोत्रों का नामकरण पेड़ पौधा, पशु पक्षी, नदी नाला, पहाड़ पर्वत इत्यादि प्राकृतिक वस्तुओं के नाम से है। और जितना भी पूजा पाठ वगैरह है उसी तरह का है। इसलिए इन सबको जानने की जरूरत, वैज्ञानिक एनालिसिस की जरूरत है। इसके साथ ही साथ उनके विशेषताओं को जानने की बात है। जैसे एग्जाम्पल के रूप में मैं कहना चाहूंगा, जैसे पहले के लोग कहते थे कि फुंडी हसा माने वो मिट्टी जो सफेद है, अर्थात चूने की मिट्टी। मेडन हसा माने लोहे की मिट्टी। पिलीन हसा अबरक वाली मिट्टी। तक कहने का मतलब है, धीरे धीरे हम समय के परिवर्तन के आलोक में धीरे धीरे अपनी चीजों को भूल रहे हैं और काफी दिनों के बाद बीए, एमए, पीएचडी करने के बाद उसी चीज को सीख रहे हैं। इसलिए हमको सोचने की जरूरत, नया जनरेशन को लोगों को विशेष रूप से इन्वॉल्व होने की जरूरत है कि किस ढंग से ये रिसर्च करेंगे। उनको रिसर्च करना चाहिए और मौलिक जो बातें हैं, चूंकि भारत को प्राचीनतम भारत का गुरु माना जा रहा है, ट्रेडिशनल भारत का इसको गुरु माना गया है, तो कहने का मतलब है इन सब चीजों को जानने की जरूरत है। इसी तरह से चूंकि विशेष परिस्थिति के आलोक में ये जो बिरसा मुंडा है वो उन्हें अपनी मौसी के वहां रहना पड़ा, जहां पर ये मौसी जिसका नाम है जोनी, वहां पर जाना पड़ा। वहां भी उनका संपर्क जयपाल नाग से हुआ। वहां भी उन्होंने गाय बल इत्यादि चराया करते थे, लेकिन उनको पढ़ने में उनको चिंतन मनन करते रहते थे, बिल्कुल चिंतन मनन करते रहते थे, जिसके कारण एक दिन वहां पर जो भी भेड़ बकरियां हैं, गाय इत्यादि हैं, बिल्कुल किसान के खेत को चर गए, जिसके कारण उसको पिटाई की गई। और जयपाल नाग के संपर्क में रह करके उन्होंने प्रारंभिक शिक्षा हासिल की। लेकिन इसी क्रम में उन्हें प्रचारक के साथ मिलने का मौका मिला। तब प्रचारक ने ये जो ट्राइबल कल्चर है, मुंडा कल्चर है, या सिंपल सोसाइटी से संबंधित जो लोग हैं उनके कल्चर को का क्रिटिसाइज करने लगते थे, तो उससे काफी नाराज हुए बिरसा, क्योंकि जानते थे कि इकोनॉमिक ढंग से या तो सामाजिक पॉइंट ऑफ व्यू से, एजुकेशन के पॉइंट ऑफ व्यू से, या तो और भी दूसरे अलग अलग पॉइंट ऑफ व्यू है, ये किस तरह से माने जुड़े हुए हैं। और उसमें जैसे कि ज्योग्राफी में पढ़ते हैं आइसोस्टेसी का सिद्धांत, जियोलॉजी में पढ़ते हैं आइसोस्टेसी का सिद्धांत, उस तरह का जुड़ाव किस तरह से ये ट्राइबल कल्चर में, क्योंकि ट्राइबल कल्चर से संबंधित जो लोग हैं पानी की गहराइयों को रिस्पेक्ट करते हैं, पहाड़ को रिस्पेक्ट करते हैं, पहाड़ों के संबंध में गुरु पर्व मनाते हैं। गुरु पर्व मनाने के क्रम में कहते हैं कि मार गुरु बोंगा या सुपर नेचुरल पावर सिंह बोंगा, रिमिल जावड़ी पे, जांटे पे, रिमिल गोंगराई पे, आर दा अल पे उठांगया। कहने का मतलब बादल समेटते संवारते सजाते हुए लाएं, बादल न उड़ाएं, और तिलहन इत्यादि की खेती ज्यादा से ज्यादा हो, फल फूल कंद मूल जड़ी बूटी लतर इत्यादि की खेती ज्यादा से ज्यादा हो, और हमको खाने का भरपेट खाने को मिले। तो इस तरह से हम लोग देखते हैं कि साइंटिफिक रीजन है। इसी तरह से सोशोलॉजिकल पॉइंट ऑफ व्यू से भी ट्राइबल कल्चर में जो कम्युनिटी फीलिंग है, सामूहिकता की भावना है, सामूहिकता की भावना के माध्यम से हम लोग काफी परिवर्तन किया जा सकता है, चेंज लाया जा सकता है। जहां तक कम्युनिटी फीलिंग की बात है, कम्युनिटी फीलिंग सभी जगह, हालांकि सिंपल सोसाइटी से संबंधित लोगों में भी है, इसके साथ ही साथ आप गवर्नमेंट, जुडिशरी, एग्जीक्यूटिव, लेजिस्लेटिव, वहां भी कम्युनिटी फीलिंग की जरूरत है। तो इन सब चीजों को मैंने चिंतन करने की जरूरत है। तो अभी जो हम लोग चर्चा कर रहे हैं ये सालगा के बारे में, तो अभी चूंकि ये जो आयोजन हो रहा है गवर्नमेंट के माध्यम से हो रहा है, इसलिए ये भी जानने की जरूरत है, ये भी जानने की जरूरत, जैसे सालगा में बिरसा पढ़े प्राइमरी स्कूल तक और जयपाल नाग वहां पर उनके शिक्षक रहे, लेकिन उसकी स्थिति क्या है। 6 साल पहले हमको जाने का मौका मिला था सालगा, वहां पर चूंकि वहां के कल्चर को न जानने वाले टीचर वहां पर थे, जिसके कारण 1-2 महीना में एक बार आते थे स्कूल। इसलिए सरकार को इसके बारे में भी चिंतन मनन की जरूरत है कि किस तरह का पॉलिसी मेकिंग करेंगे, किस तरह का क्या करेंगे, इसके बारे में हम लोग मिलजुल करके सोचने समझने की जरूरत है। और विशेष करके यंग जनरेशन के जो लोग हैं उनको भी सोचने समझने की जरूरत है कि किस तरह से हमारे भारत देश का डेवलपमेंट होगा, किस तरह से हमारा स्टेट का डेवलपमेंट होगा, किस तरह से विलेज का डेवलपमेंट होगा, किस तरह का कॉन्सेप्ट होना चाहिए, डेवलपमेंट का कॉन्सेप्ट क्या होना चाहिए। डेवलपमेंट का कॉन्सेप्ट इस तरह से हो कि लोगों का कमर टूटे नहीं, लोगों का अर्थात कहने का मतलब है हम साइकोलॉजिकल ढंग से भी हीन भावना से ग्रसित नहीं हो। इन सभी बिंदुओं पर हमको जानने सोचने समझने की जरूरत है। अब हम कहेंगे ये बिरसा मुंडा मिशन में वहां पर उन्होंने एडमिशन लेने के लिए ये गए। इस क्रम में उनके पैर में छाले पड़ गए, जिसके कारण एडमिशन का समय बिल्कुल ही खत्म हो गया था। उसके बावजूद भी उनके दयनीय स्थिति को देख करके बिरसा का एडमिशन लिया गया। तो वहां पर देखा गया कुछ साल वहां पर लगभग 86 से 90 ईस्वी तक रहा। तो वहां पर भी फादर नॉटरेट इत्यादि या तो जो भी मिशनरी से संबंधित लोग हैं वो उन बारे में बातचीत करते हुए उनको सुनने का मौका मिला। ये जब अपनी धर्म को छोड़ करके या तो अपना जो विशेषताएं हैं उनको छोड़ करके जब एडॉप्ट करेंगे, क्रिश्चियनिटी एडॉप्ट करेंगे, तभी मदद किया जाएगा। चूंकि सरदारी आंदोलन था और एक्सप्लॉइट हो रहे थे, जमीन जायदाद लूटे जा रहे थे। बाद में उससे काफी नाराज हुए बिरसा मुंडा और अब फादर नॉटरेट इत्यादि का भी क्रिटिसिज्म करने लगे, जिसके कारण उनको बहुत जल्द स्कूल छोड़ना पड़ा। चूंकि उनके बातों से ये बिल्कुल सहमत नहीं थे, उनकी बातों से सहमत नहीं थे, क्योंकि इनका सोच बिल्कुल इंडिपेंडेंट सोच था और सिंपल सोसाइटी से संबंधित लोगों को, सरलतम समाज से संबंधित लोगों को नजदीक से जानते थे, उनके कल्चर को जानते थे, सभी सिस्टम को जानते थे। बाद में जब वहां से का इन्होंने किया, का दौरा किया, तो मैं कुछ मैंने बातों के बारे में चर्चा करना चाहूंगा। तो उनको जो आइडिया मिला, चींटियों की तरह एकजुट हों, चींटियों की तरह एकजुट हों, काम में लगे रहें जब तक कि देश की प्राप्ति नहीं हो। अर्थात जब स्कूल उन्होंने छोड़ा तो ये उनका जो फाइंडिंग्स है, ये लोगों को चींटियों की तरह एकजुट होना चाहिए और काम में लगे रहना चाहिए ताकि देश की प्राप्ति में ये सफल हो। फिर उनको ये आंदोलन के क्रम में ये जानने का मौका मिला कि साहब एक टोपी, अर्थात जितने भी साहब है सभी लोगों का एक तरह का टोपी है, चाहे अंग्रेज का टोपी हो चाहे इंडियंस का टोपी हो, सब एक्सप्लॉइट करते हैं, है ना। इस तरह से उन्होंने कहा। फिर उनका कहना है हेंदे रामड़ा केचे केचे, हुंडी रामड़ा केचे केचे, अर्थात डेवलपमेंट के पॉइंट ऑफ व्यू से, डेवलपमेंट के पॉइंट ऑफ व्यू से यदि अंग्रेज गड़बड़ कर रहे हैं तो उनके खिलाफ भी संघर्ष होना चाहिए, यदि हमारे लोग गड़बड़ कर रहे हैं तो हमारे लोगों के विरुद्ध भी संघर्ष करना चाहिए। और ये जो बिरसा मुंडा की जो प्रासंगिकता है, बिरसा मुंडा का जो जरूरत है, अभी भी जरूरत है, अभी भी जमीन जायदाद इत्यादि लूटे जा रहे हैं, धड़ल्ले से लूटे जा रहे हैं, पूरे झारखंड लेवल में लूटे जा रहे हैं, शहर लेवल में लूटे जा रहे हैं, दूसरे लेवल में लूटे जा रहे हैं। जबकि बिरसा मुंडा का ये फ्रीडम फाइटर्स हैं और उन्होंने जल जंगल जमीन के विरुद्ध उन्होंने संघर्ष किया और CNT एक्ट बना। लेकिन CNT एक्ट आप देखते हैं शहरों में देखिए या कहीं भी देखिए, मान लिया 200 लैंड होल्डर्स है, उसके बावजूद भी बिल्कुल ही ट्राइबल का जमीन नहीं ले सकता है, लेकिन दूसरे लोग बुरी तरह से लूटे जा रहे हैं। इसलिए इस पर और सोचना करना चाहिए मैदान से, या तो और यंग जनरेशन के जो है उनको समझने की जरूरत है, फाइंड आउट करने की जरूरत है, रिसर्च करने की जरूरत है कि हम लोग कैसे आगे बढ़ेंगे। और जो बिल्कुल ही दयनीय स्थिति में जो ट्राइबल हैं उसको कैसे आगे बढ़ाया जा सकता है, तो हमको रूट लेवल से जानने की जरूरत है, उनके साइकोलॉजी को जानने की जरूरत है, इकोनॉमी की जरूरत है जानने की जरूरत है, ज्योग्राफी को जानने की जरूरत है। अर्थात जितना भी सब्जेक्ट है, एंथ्रोपोलॉजी, सोशियोलॉजी, हिस्ट्री, साइकोलॉजी, पॉलिटिकल साइंस, या तो और भी जितना भी या तो केमिस्ट्री, जियोलॉजी, जूलॉजी और जितने भी सब्जेक्ट हैं उसके आलोक में रिसर्च करने की जरूरत है और सिंपल सोसाइटी के बारे में रिसर्च करें। इसके साथ ही साथ सभी के बारे में भी डेवलपमेंट लेवल सरकार की तरह धीरे आगे बढ़े ताकि सभी लोगों का कल्याण हो। तो इस संबंध में एपोलॉजी के बाद और थोड़ा सा जिसे इस क्रम में मैं कहना चाहूंगा, आप देखेंगे जैसे कुत्ते को आप घास खाते हुए देखेंगे, बिल्ली को घास खाते हुए देखेंगे, गाय बैलों को मिट्टी चाटते हुए देखेंगे, बकरी को मिट्टी चाटते हुए देखेंगे, भेड़ों को मिट्टी चाटते हुए देखेंगे। तो उससे सीखने की जरूरत है। उसमें आयरन मिलता है, कार्बोहाइड्रेट मिलता है कि क्या मिलता है, एक इन सब के बारे में भी हमको रिसर्च करने की जरूरत है। तो ये जहां तक बिरसा मुंडा की बात है, इन्होंने संघर्ष के क्रम में कई लोगों को इनवाइट किया, जगह जगह पर इनवाइट किया। यहाँ कई गांवों का नाम है, जैसे लोहरदगा, रांची, बुंडू, या तो कर्रा, तोरपा, कोलीबरा, और भी कई एक गांव है जैसे रुमचू, गुतरू, सेम्बा, गिरियन, अर्थात कई गांव है कहने का मतलब। तो उस आलोक में हमको जानने की जरूरत है बिरसा मुंडा का जो आंदोलन है ये तो एक माध्यम है, तो उस माध्यम से हम लोग ये सिंपल सोसाइटी से संबंधित जो लोग हैं उनके डेवलपमेंट के लिए क्या कर सकते हैं इसके बारे में चर्चा करने की जरूरत है। तो अंततः इन्होंने अंग्रेजों को भगाने का प्रयास किया, और इस क्रम में जो दारोगा वगैरह हैं उनका भी विरोध किया गया, कई जगह विरोध हुआ। तो इसी क्रम में लगभग 9 जनवरी को संघर्ष हुआ डोंबारी बुरू में, डोंबारी बुरू साइल रकाब की ओर से। वहां पर कई मुंडा मारे गए, अगल बगल के गांव के लोग मारे गए, इसके कई गांवों का नाम है 400-500 का। तो ये क्यों संघर्ष किए, इस पर चिंतन मनन करने की जरूरत है और आगे बढ़ने की जरूरत है। तो इसके संघर्ष के बाद आप देखेंगे, हालांकि बिरसा मुंडा के बारे में सभी जानते हैं तो इसलिए मैं ज्यादा नहीं कहना चाहूंगा। लास्ट में रोगोतो आपका बांधगांव पड़ेगा, वहां पर आखिरी जो उनकी लड़ाई हुई वहां पर, जैसे उनके 2 माने फीमेल्स उनके सहयोगी थे, फीमेल सहयोगी थे, उनके माध्यम से उनकी रखवाली की जाती थी। अंततः ये वहां पर रोगोतो में पकड़े गए, क्योंकि उनके प्रति अनाउंस किया गया था कि इतना पैसा इनाम के रूप में मिलेगा। अंततः लास्ट में उसको देखने के लिए उसको अरेस्ट किया गया, उसके बाद यहाँ पर जेल में लाया गया, और रांची जेल में, हालांकि इसके संबंध कई जेल सुप्रिंटेंडेंट हुए, डिप्टी कमिश्नर या तो दूसरे जितने भी लोग हैं उनके संपर्क हुआ। लास्ट में कहा जाने लगा कि इनको हैजा हो गया है। अंततः 9 जून को इनका देहांत हो गया। तो मेरे कहने का मतलब है ये जितने भी हमारे फ्रीडम फाइटर्स हैं उनका मूल सोच क्या है, मूल सोच के आलोक में हमको जो विभिन्न जो सब्जेक्ट हैं बिल्कुल डिवोटी होकर के, समाजशास्त्र के माध्यम से, एंथ्रोपोलॉजी के माध्यम से, पॉलिटिकल साइंस के माध्यम से, इकोनॉमिक्स के माध्यम से, ह्यूमैनिटीज के माध्यम से, या तो रिसर्च हो। और मैं कहना चाहूंगा यहाँ पर लैंग्वेज का ट्रांसलेशन भी होना चाहिए, जैसे मुंडारी हो, संथाल, खड़िया, बिरहोर, बिरजिया, माली, गोड़ाई, खेरवार। इसी तरह से आप देखेंगे यहाँ पर तमिल, तेलुगु, मलयालम, कन्नड़, कोडाकू, सौरिया पहाड़िया, माल पहाड़िया, और भी कई लोग हैं जैसे कुड़ुक इत्यादि भाषा है। इसी तरह नॉर्थ ईस्टर्न में देखिएगा ये नॉर्थ ईस्टर्न का जो भाषा समुदाय है, तो वहां पर आका, डफला, वांचो, मणिपुरी जितने भी हैं उनका रिसर्च होना चाहिए और ट्रांसलेशन होना चाहिए, और मूल तथ्यों को उजागर करने की जरूरत है। जैसे कि आप देखेंगे ऑस्ट्रो लैंग्विस्टिक फैमिली के साथ साथ जैसे हिंदी स्पीकिंग फैमिली भी है, जैसे हिंदी, उर्दू, बंगला, गुजराती, मराठी, पंजाबी, सिंधी, कश्मीरी, और भी कई एक चीज है। तो मेरे कहने का मतलब है ये जो छोटी छोटी जो भाषा है, ऑस्ट्रो लिंग्विस्टिक फैमिली जो है इसका आप इसको आगे बढ़ाने की भी जरूरत है। जैसा कि मुझे जानकारी है ये पुरातनतम भाषा समुदाय है, पुरानी भाषा समुदाय है, इसलिए इस पर रिसर्च करने की जरूरत है। उनके गीत, संगीत, गाना, टोटम, टेबू इत्यादि के बारे में, जोकिंग रिलेशनशिप, एवोडेंस रिलेशनशिप, इसी तरह से पहाड़, पर्वत, नदी, नाला, खेत, खलिहान इत्यादि के बारे में ट्रांसलेशन हो, गाना के बारे में ट्रांसलेशन हो, और उसका क्या आइडिया हमको मिलता है, और उस आइडिया के माध्यम से हम पर्यावरण की रक्षा करें, पर्यावरण की रक्षा के साथ साथ हमारे देश को आगे बढ़ाएं, गांव को आगे बढ़ाएं, और किस तरह का पॉलिसी मेकिंग करेंगे विलेज लेवल में, देश लेवल में, ताकि हमारा सर्वाइवल हो, गरीब से गरीब व्यक्ति का भी सर्वाइवल हो और अमीर से अमीर व्यक्ति का भी सर्वाइवल हो। ऐसा नहीं कि गरीब व्यक्ति, जैसे यहाँ पर प्रॉपर्टी दो तरह का होता है, मटेरियल प्रॉपर्टी, नॉन मटेरियल प्रॉपर्टी। नॉन मटेरियल प्रॉपर्टी जो है गीत, संगीत, कहानी, कहावत, बुझल, ऑनेस्टी, डिटर्मिनेशन इत्यादि सब कुछ। और जो मटेरियल प्रॉपर्टी है जिसको हम लोग देख रहे हैं, लेकिन बहुत दुख की बात है कि धीरे धीरे अब जो नॉन मटेरियल प्रॉपर्टी है उससे भी हम वंचित हो रहे हैं। जैसे कि इसलिए सरकार को विशेष रूप से ध्यान देने की जरूरत है। क्या करेंगे? 1 रुपया चावल, फ्री में चावल, काम करना छोड़ दिया है, जबकि बूढ़े पुरखे अपने से खेत बनाते थे, अपने से जंगल बचाते थे, अपने से कुआं बनाया है, अपने से सब कुछ बनाया है। मदद सिस्टम के माध्यम से किसी का घर जल गया तो पूरे 1 दिन में तैयार। इसी तरह से साथ में एग्रीकल्चर के काम में इन्वॉल्व रहते थे। तो कहने का मतलब है यहाँ पर नया यंग स्कॉलर्स हैं, बिल्कुल ही नए लोग हैं, उनको भी तन मन धन के साथ डिवोटी बनकर रिसर्च करने की जरूरत है, आगे बढ़ाने की जरूरत है। बिरसा तो एक माध्यम है, इसलिए जितने भी स्वतंत्रता सेनानी हैं ये एक माध्यम है। देश को आगे बढ़ाएं मिलजुल करके, और बिल्कुल प्राचीनतम गुरु जो भारत को कहा जाता था उस तरह का बनाएं। इन्हीं सब के साथ आप सबको पुनः धन्यवाद। प्रोफेसर ए.बी. ओटा जी को बहुत बहुत धन्यवाद, विजय शंकर सहाय जी को बहुत बहुत धन्यवाद, क्योंकि प्रोफेसर विजय शंकर सहाय के माध्यम से ही प्रोफेसर ए.बी. ओटा के साथ हमको मेरा कांटेक्ट हुआ। और हालांकि मैं थोड़ा सा कहना चाहूंगा, मेरा तबीयत खराब था, उसके बावजूद हमको जोश आ गया। ठीक है, आप सभी को जोहार, बहुत बहुत जोहार। इसलिए हमको भी डाउट था कि हम बोल पाएंगे कि नहीं बोल पाएंगे, मेरा आवाज उतना साफ नहीं है। ठीक है, नमस्कार, जोहार।
Thank you, Munda Sahab. Professor Munda Sahab, you really, again, as a tribal, you spoke from the heart, and you were very candid. You were very, informal, and whatever you have said, I consider this to be truth. And thank you very much with your wide experience for the exposition that you have made. And you have tried to say Birsa Munda and his philosophy. I think you have done justice by doing so. Now, may I request Professor Vijay Sahab, who in fact, was disconnected for one talk because of some, glitches, technical glitches, to kindly sum up.
Yeah.
Because he is the chairperson and he is the person who is authorized to sum up. Since we are running against time, I would request you to kindly conclude in 5 to 7 minutes.
Only in a few minutes, even within 5 minutes, I may come. Actually, you deserve thanks and congratulations also for one thing, that the issue that you have initiated about today's webinar has raised more questions than answers. It was very interesting to listen to all the speakers. And I'm sure that in the light of all these discussion and thought presented by the learned speakers, in future, we can make a good plan to more deeply study the social and cultural events that was during the time of Birsa Munda. This is a very significant thing that emerges in my mind. However, since we had to finish it at 1:30 and now it's more than 2 o'clock. So without commenting on anybody's talk, I would like only to say that this starting of the Janjatiya Gaurav Divas, this decision is truly a very welcome decision, and that contributions of Birsa Munda will certainly, if brought to light, will help empowering the tribals. And the webinar is a very timely step by the TRI Odisha. This is only the beginning. I'm sure in the weeks to come and the years to come, it will inspire the researchers, particularly those who are interested in the study of the simple societies. And I'm sure that in other such webinar sessions, we shall be having more fruitful discussion as well. With these words, I once again thank Professor Otap and the TRI Odisha, Ministry of Tribal Affairs, and all those who have participated in today's this discussion. Thank you very much.
We are greatly privileged to listen to Professor Vijay Sahai. When expression fails to language, we search for an exact emotional equivalence in the realms of objective correlative. But we have no such objective correlative to give adequacy to our feelings, since we have been overwhelmed with emotion. And to give you a profile of Professor Vijay Sahai, Hamlet introducing to Horacio tells he was a man, taken for all in all. We may not look upon his life again. Hamlet, the famous character in the tragedy of William Shakespeare, the myriad-minded man of Renaissance, has rightly indicated, and with the words of Hamlet, rather I would say, that Professor Vijay Sahai, taking for all in all, we cannot look upon his life again. Indeed, sir, your gracious presence has added luster to this program, and we are very much privileged to have the eminent panelists, those who spoke about different aspects of Bhagwan Birsa Munda in this national webinar, and we are extremely grateful to Professor Akhil Bihari Kota, esteemed director, SCSP RTI, TRI Odisha, and advisor to SCSP RTI, and also special secretary of the department, who has been instrumental in organizing this national webinar to the appreciation of all concerned. And we are very much grateful to you, sir, and you deserve commendation, and so many compliments come over this digital interface related to your contribution to organizing this particular national seminar. And to conclude, I would like to request Professor Akhil Bihari to kindly present the note of thanks to mark an end to this national webinar.
Thank you. Before extending the formal vote of thanks, I would only make 2-3 mentions. These 5 presentations by 5 panelists which has been made is only tip of the iceberg of Birsa Munda ji, because there are so many. I am particularly impressed with Gunjal's presentation, the way he presented. Not that I am not overwhelmed by other presentations. You see, there could be so many dimensions of this multifaceted personality. So while thanking each one of you, I must tell you that probably this has opened now gate, and we have to see Birsa Munda in 360 degree. So I think, again, I'm repeating, this being the 75th year of India's independence, and Honorable Prime Minister also has declared this 15th November as the in honor of Bhagwan Birsa Munda as Janajatiya Gaurav Divas. I think by 15th of 2022, August, we must sit down with more experts. Maybe we'll have a workshop, try to identify what are the dimensions that can be touched upon to bring out a volume on Birsa Munda, so that many unraveled things can come up. Many things which do not find in the pages of the history will come up, and we can come up with a book under one umbrella, so that many people can have a look at it, the posterity can look at it and can probably see it and refer to it as a Bible. Because when we are talking about, Bhagwan Birsa Munda, there are many, many untold things, many, many controversial things. I think everything should be brought to the floor, and it has to be deliberated in a very nice manner without keeping any controversy or without keeping any question mark on issues which are controversial in nature. I'm sure my institute will take the lead, and we will take help of all the academicians, all the experts, all the tribals, all the tribal elites, and definitely come up with a compilation. And I only pray God, and I only appeal to all of you that we can come up with such a thing. That is one of my dreams. My second dream is, I have already spoken to Professor Sahai. Sage Publication brings out a journal from under his banner. We may rope in him, and we may also rope in Sumohan Bandopadhyay, and may think of Man in India. We will try to find out where we will find the right platform to bring it out. But I promise you, I'll work in this direction, but I need support of everybody. With these words, I extend a very formal vote of thanks to, first of all, Dr. Nabaljit Kapoor, the Joint Secretary, Minister of Tribal Affairs, who has been always a constant support to us for organizing this kind of a lead in many, many issues which are not touched upon by other institutes of the country. I extend my heartfelt gratitude to him. My special, thanks to my principal secretary, Madam Nanjana Chopra, who has given enough liberty to this research institute to work, in constructive manner for things of this kind. Thirdly, I would like to extend my gratitude to my honorable, esteemed minister, ST and SC Development Department, Government of Odisha, Mr. Jagannath Sarakaji, for his, support to us and making it possible to take part in the inaugural session. My special thanks again to the keynote speaker, Professor Sahai, with whom I started, dreaming of this particular webinar. And thank you very much, sir. I thank all the four panelists, distinguished panelists, Professor K.K. Basa, who is a very good friend, an old friend of mine, Professor Sumohan Bandopadhyay, a young professor with a lot of promise, Gunjal Ikir Munda, who has impressed me the most today, and who spoke from his heart, soul, and mind as a tribal, various dimensions which are not normally touched by researchers. Professor Satyanarayan Munda, the veteran and the former Vice Chancellor. And it will be difficult on my part to name each one of you. I can say Professor S.B. Roy. I can see Professor N.C. Das. I have also, seen today Professor Mutatkar, the old veteran. I have seen Professor P.K. Misra also attending this. And there are so many people, veterans who have attended today. I am sure this half a day webinar must have created some kind of a sensation in them, some kind of a thought in them to probe and see, and go into more depth about the life and contributions of Birsa Munda. I'm sure that this sensitization is definitely going to give you food for thought and to probe further, so that we can really come up with a masterpiece book by 15th of August 2022. Whenever I give any deadline, I try to meet it. But you can meet it only if support is properly rendered by experts. I am not an expert. I am sure this dream will come to reality. Again, I extend a very heartfelt gratitude to all of you for kindly attending this webinar, and we'll have many such webinars in months to come. Thank you. Thank you so much. The webinar is officially over.